what's today? April 30th, 2014 to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Francisco. Hart. Here. Hotchkiss. Here. Murillo.
Here.
Rouse. Here. White. Mayor Snyder.
Here. There's any public comment items not on the agenda? Nope. Okay, I'll close public comment and move it over to Public Works Budget Workshop. Ms. Bjork.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of the Council. I'm Rebecca Bjork, Public Works Director, and I'm very pleased to be here today to present to you the Public Works Department's proposed budget for 2015. Presenting with me today are Pat Kelly, Assistant Public Works Director and City Engineer, Browning Allen, Transportation Manager, Gary Horwald, Fleet Manager, Jim Dewey, Facilities and Energy Manager, and Joshua Hagmark, Acting Water Resources Manager. Each of them will be presenting the budgets for their individual divisions. The Public Works Department is comprised of 6 different divisions: administration, engineering, facilities, fleet, transportation, and water resources. There are almost 300 people in the department, 14 managers, 300 general employees. We are proposing to add a full-time employee to the department in the engineering division to work to support the capital improvement program for the wastewater fund. We have 29 performance-based budget programs representing the different programs of work that we do within the department. This slide represents our revenue sources. The total revenue for the department is projected to be $105 million next year, with slightly more than half of that coming from water and wastewater, 7.8 from general fund, although of course, as you are aware, a good portion of that is actually returned to general fund in the form of engineering revenues. Streets is $14.5 million, and that is comprised of a number of different funding sources, including Measure A, UUT, and others, and grants. Street sweeping, downtown parking facilities at 6.8 and fleet at 5.3. You will see that we are proposing to spend about $12 million more than revenues next year. This is from reserves. Most of these reserves are reserves above policy, but there are a couple of situations where we are proposing to use council policy reserves, and the division managers will address those as they go through their budgets. We believe those are prudent and appropriate uses in keeping with council policy on reserves. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about how the general fund supported portions of the Public Works Department. The general fund supports administration, engineering services, and environmental compliance. We are proposing a small adjustment in our revenues. This has to do with the addition of the full-time person, and as I explained, we do charge engineering services and recover the costs from the funds that are being supported. So you saw the revenue there, but you also see the increased expense in salaries and benefits here. The big change to special projects is an adjustment to more closely align the budgeted work with the work we think we can accomplish in environmental compliance next year. And Jim Dewey will talk about that more in his budget, but it's more a recognition of the work we actually need to do to remain compliant and the work we believe we'll actually need to accomplish within that division. So we've reduced that budget to reflect that we don't believe we'll expend that money next year. So overall, the changes to the general fund portion of the department's budget are $57,000. I just want to talk a little bit about what we do. In administration, we support division. The administration division supports the division management of the entire department. A big part of the administration department is the work of Michelle DeCant and Brandon Baudet on the budget. Not only do they monitor and make sure that budget is being properly managed throughout the year, they are instrumental to making the changes to this budget. They've done all of the work to make sure that the necessary changes went into the budget that's proposed to you, and also to coordinate and develop the presentation that we're giving to you today. In the coming year, we will be updating the city's capital improvement plan. And the administration department coordinates that for all city departments. So looking ahead 6 years and looking at what we are proposing to do over the next 6 years and putting all of that information together to develop a comprehensive capital improvement plan for the city. In addition, they perform numerous other services such as managing the P3 program and managing all of the administrative staff coordination and training within the department. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Pat Kelly to talk about the engineering division.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and Council. So the engineering division has 3 operational divisions: the engineering services, land development, traffic engineering, and then we have this fiscal year a maintenance division group, rather traffic signals, has been added, recognizing the direct connection between the, thank you, Rebecca, between the traffic engineer and the traffic signal maintenance staff. And then Streets Capital is, in a sense, in engineering because we are the project owner, but in reality, I mean, as far as the program owner is how our P3s operate, but in reality, it's a collaboration between engineering division, transportation, and facilities as far as managing all the different interests and types of projects within Streets Capital. A variety of funds are used to support all these different functions. Engineering division, most of its funding is from chargeback on charges for completing the capital project. But interestingly enough, this fiscal year we have some general fund support. And then also some of our staff are paid directly out of the Measure A. Now then our Streets Capital is funded by Measure A capital funds, utility users tax, and also grant funds. Our traffic engineering and traffic signal group are paid for totally out of the utility users tax. And some highlights for next fiscal year are for the engineering services. Let me focus on the engineering services program right now. So you've heard a lot about the bridges that we've been working on, and that we are starting 3 bridge projects starting next year. Here's a picture of Cabrillo Boulevard. Also, a key function is going to be supporting Joshua Hegmark with the drought facilities with the design and construction support. And the next fiscal year, our traffic engineer has been very good in grantsmanship and getting some highway safety improvement program projects. And so we'll be helping the design and construction and delivery of that. And of course, following up on what Rebecca had noted is that supporting the administrative group in the cost estimates, et cetera, associated with updating the 6-year CIP. So a big element of engineering services, of course, is the capital delivery. Here is a web shot of construction activity within the city, the little hard hats there. Key elements of our work are in community outreach and engagement. We want to do more than just tell the public, here we come. To be successful and have the engagement of the community, we need to do more than that. So we have a routine outreach on our water lines, sewer lines, and pavement projects, but we also have some special outreach and community meetings regarding the more complex projects such as bridges. And of course, we work for all the departments in delivery of the capital program, so there's a lot of interdepartmental coordination. And financial accountability. You can check our P3s, and a big element of our performance measures is, what is the cost of service, and are we meeting our schedules? Regarding public outreach, here's a unique item that we'll be bringing to you in the near future, and that is the significant intensity of work on Lower State Street. And here's a diagram John Wasiak will be presenting probably in early June, that just shows all the different projects that we have. We have the Entrada, and we have our Mason Street Bridge, our Cabrillo Bridge, our Anacapa intersection construction, And then the county is building 2 segments of the Lower Mission Creek project, hopefully in the next 2 years. And then on top of that, we're going to be, some of the pieces of the puzzle will be the Children's Museum, Entrada, And Beacons, I understand, is redeveloping, and who knows what else will be coming our way. So it is a bit of a puzzle. We like puzzles, and especially solving them. And here's just some photos of examples of what we do. Really like the photo of the picture on top of Mission Creek Fish Passage that shows the rebar ready for pour within the Mission Creek Channel. And all we need is a big flow, and maybe we'll get some fish going up the passage. Then, of course, we have our Chapala Street Bridge, and it's beating a new standard that we have of our bridges. The old bridges were built almost 100 years ago, and not much on Ped Bike Passage, and all our new bridges meet that standard. And then here's just a clip of some of the complexity of the projects that we work on. El Estero is a significant effort. The tertiary reclaimed water treatment plant would be another element of the complexity of the work that we work as a team with the stakeholders. Then here, you've seen this before as part of my capital improvement program update, and it just shows the variability of the completion of work within the city. Now, if you go back and do an average of the last 5 years, that's approximately $38 million. And if you go for the last 10 years, that's about $35 million. Although last year, 2013, primarily because of the completion of the airport terminal, we had close to 95, or almost 90. Next year, we project just up to 20, but we'll have a lot of big projects in construction. But it just points out that the amount of work that the city provides, much of this is leveraged with grant funding and is intended to provide extra jobs within the community. So here is be talking about the streets capital. Streets capital is more than pavement maintenance, although my presentation will be focused on pavement maintenance. There's many other aspects of the streets capital. Sidewalk maintenance that Browning will be talking about. Street lighting is Jim's bailiwick. And then traffic signal safety, which is Derek's. But a significant amount is also bridges and match to meet that. So there's a lot of demands. And what I'll be talking about is also one of the infrastructures that everybody experiences pretty much every day, and that's the streets. And so here's a map of the city that shows the color code of streets. And it's not that easy to see, but blowing up, you'll see a lot of red up here in the Riviera. Most of those are the concrete streets that are considered in poor condition, although the structure of the road is in good shape. And there's only a few streets in town that have green, which is considered excellent and very good. Our average is 63, which is just considered fair. And our goal has been for some time to have a pavement condition index of 70, where 100 is a brand new street. So that's the scale of what we're measuring. We've had limited funding in the past, and so what's been happening is that our pavement condition has been dropping. A highlight of this fiscal year is the approximate $500,000 that the general fund is contributing towards streets capital, and that's going to help out. That's a 20% increase, approximately, of the funding that has been set aside. And with that money, we'll be able to resurface Coyote Road, which is in bad shape up in the off Mountain Drive. And then as part of the arterials in the downtown, we'll be doing segments of Coda Street, Garden Street, and Gutierrez this fiscal year.
Quick question, if I could. How do we determine what comes next in the repair category?
What we have is we've divided the city up into 6 zones. And so we rotate through the city and hit in each zone what we believe are the streets that are most eligible according to how our pavement maintenance management program information gives us.
So if I understand, in each zone you say, okay, this is the worst one in this zone, we're going to address this zone this month or this year or whatever.
Pretty much. There's some unique decision-making done, like, for example, we have a lot of concrete streets that haven't moved in probably 30, 40 years, but they don't look very good. And then we have some asphalt streets that you can see the change in just 1 or 2 years. In particular, comes to my mind is a segment of Gutierrez between State and Chapala. I remember a couple years ago, I think when we went out and visited the site regarding a traffic condition at Chapala, the road just had some cracks in it, but now you'll see alligatoring. So now the subgrade, the foundation underneath the asphalt is beginning to fail.
So this is sort of a political question, but so every part of the city gets addressed in the course of a year or what?
Well, we rotate through 6 years and do our best to address each section to try to be as fair as possible. But then what can happen, and this has been an issue with the city for some time, is that people with the concrete street sometimes feel very unloved because nothing happens there. But then you look at, a limited pot of money, how are you going to optimize the use of that funds? And it's if the foundation's not going anywhere, you don't want to work on it. And there's several presentations, especially John has been done, and we'll probably be doing some in the future, where there's a deterioration curve. So you want to keep up, you want to get that pavement up on the top before it really starts dropping off. And the further you get down on the curve, it gets more expensive to push it up.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Just on that, so all the different colors there, obviously, if the average is 63, you want the average to be 70, focusing on the red ones that are probably what, like 30s and 40s, or
It's
what?
40 and below.
40 and below, okay. If you just worked on those, then your average is going to go way up, right? Because if a 35 turns into a 100, if you fix it, then that really fixes the average. But you're only doing a small portion of the city streets. So, there's quality and quantity, I guess. And I guess what I'm sort of thinking out loud here, we keep thinking about this average of 70, but really the range is huge. And I'm wondering if we should look more at a median. What's our median? How many roads are below a certain number or above a certain number? So we have a better sense of the big picture, because the averages, whether if you have a few hundreds and a few 35s, well, that's going to, you see where I'm going with this?
Yes, and we've run a number of scenarios, and and there's been a significant amount of internal discussion of just how do you solve this puzzle, because each street is its own unique beast, and a city that as old as ours is that trying to get the behavior of all the soils underneath all the pavement and tracking all that, it becomes a very significant challenge to really do a real scientific optimization of what is the best strategy. So we use a lot of technology or software and advice from what's being used statewide to try to make those decisions. And so that's just kind of a value-added discussion of what you brought on. And so, yes, we are doing scenarios, and I think we've done the median. We'll double-check and get back, and we can report on that also.
I was going to ask, do you know what the median number is?
I don't have that off the top of my head.
I mean, just like housing, right? You look at the average and the median could be two very different numbers.
Right.
And if you're really looking at the broad of what we're looking at citywide and balancing it out throughout the city, it might be better to look at a median. I don't know. But.
Right, and and depending upon the phenomena, you can learn a lot about the phenomena if the median and the average are really different. If they're the same, then it means something also.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The concrete streets, are those, what would be their grade? I mean, I appreciate you're saying they're old, they're...
Generally, they're in the red to orange.
Okay, so they're stable, they're poor but stable.
Right, and one thing to keep in mind is that, how are these judged? And part of the judgment of this numerical system is really focused more on asphalt than on concrete, because the judgment system, the measure that you use, is the number of cracks. And so concretes are going to have big honking cracks. And it doesn't really include, the fact that it hasn't moved in 40 years or not, or 20, whatever. So, I mean, you have to be careful about what these numbers mean. But it is a tool. It's the tool that's used statewide, and it's the best tool we have. It's just a matter of keeping in mind what it means. So, one of the key things to note, I wanted to bring to here is, some of the numbers that are here in the 6-year CIP, which we're going to be updating, and is that for this fiscal year, we projected $2.48 million that would be available from UUT and Measure D. Actually, it's more like 2.1. However, we have about 344 from grants, so that bumps it up. And then with the $500,000 from general fund, we're close to $3 million. However, if we want to get back up to 70, we need 12.7 million. So there's a significant shortfall in funding to get up there. In fact, just to keep at 63, as is described here, page 252 of your 6-year CIP, if you happen to have it in your back pocket, is, as we describe up here, $6.7 million. So the issue is, and I think it's been well known, and we've been talking about it for some time, is that, the amount of funding for pavement maintenance is not as much as we want it. And for that matter, it's not as much for the other programs that Browning and Jim have also, and Derek has. It's a challenge, and what we're working on is managing the infrastructure as optimum as we can. Moving on to the Land Development and Real Property Program, this is we are integrally tied with the Community Development Land Development team. And some of the key issues that are coming up next year is that Southern California Edison has given us some good news, at least for me as a resident of the city, to upgrade their infrastructure. Hopefully I'll have less brownouts. And that means is that there'll be in the street probably some additional traffic control. And that many times means additional revenue for our pavement, our public works permits. However, because it's speculative, we have not boosted up our projected revenue based on that, because we've had these projections before and didn't come through. Other key things, as I noted earlier, is that...
Pat, excuse me, is it possible to be more specific about Southern California Edison infrastructure improvements? Does that mean new poles? Does it mean...
What I've been told is that they're going to be working within their vaults and pulling a lot of new wiring. Less poles, but just replacing the wires is what I recall as their biggest expense.
So nothing really observable, as it were?
We'll find out when they come through, but we don't know exactly. But generally, they'll be improving the materials of delivering their service.
I'm being optimistic by say undergrounding?
No, that's not part. That's extra.
Yeah.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hotchkiss, we did meet with Edison, and they're looking at all their different circuits, and they're evaluating all the circuits, and the ones that they believe need work, they're going to do a complete overhaul. Doesn't mean they will replace the entire circuit, but anything that does need replacement or improvement on that circuit will be addressed as they overhaul different circuits. They also have a fairly significant pole replacement program going on, so they will be replacing poles with like poles around town. So that's sort of, it's a maintenance program, not to make the system be more reliable.
And then a significant amount of part of the land development in the program includes our senior real property agents, and there's a significant amount of acquisition with our bridge program, some for temporary construction easements, some for permanent acquisition. And then upon upon completion of some of the bridges, like for instance, when Coda Street Bridge is done, we'll be selling 3 pieces of excess property. And those pieces of property, the revenue from that can be used for the match for future bridge projects. Traffic engineering. Derek's been very busy with a number of things, many of them responding to the residents. Many of you have been copied on much of that. And also, he's been also leveraging his resources in the capital program as best he can by applying and getting highway safety improvement program grants.
Is this the point to ask about the problems we had with the lights for the pedestrians on Milpas? I understand there's been some
Yes, this
function
would be.
problems.
And this is one of the things that Derek just does with his with the traffic signal crew maintenance to convert from the solar to hardwired. We wanted to get that those that installation in as fast as possible. If we had hardwired it from the beginning, we would have delayed it several months.
Yeah.
So we did an experiment. Let's see if it can work with
Right.
solar. Didn't as well as we need it to be. So he's using his operational funds within his program and traffic signals to hardwire it.
Is that just at 500 or where? I can't remember.
It's both. We're doing both.
Both of them need it. Huh?
Do one, we're going to do both.
Is that because of the trees that shield it from the sun, or?
Any number of all the above.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I mean,
There's always something, right?
hardwire, yeah, is just more reliable.
Okay.
Key part, what they do is to optimize traffic signals so we can all get to and from work or to work and home as fast as possible. And also provides expertise for much of our civil design within our streets. Here is an item that Derek initiated, and that is an annual crash analysis report. Here's a map of the entire city that shows all the crashes for all modes of travel within the city, vehicular, bike, and ped. And this is what he uses to analyze what items he believes he should be focusing on. And you can see in the downtown, there's just a lot of things happening. He's been successful in getting $1 million for traffic signal improvements throughout the town. So hopefully many of these will be reduced over the next few years. And as he does these each year, he'll find a pattern and as to how to focus his resources and his thoughts. $500,000 for safer pedestrian crossings, a new traffic signal at De La Vina and Arriaga, and then $100,000 for ped flashers on De La Vina. So these are some of the things that he has been successful on, and he's in the process, in coordination and collaboration with transportation planning and our engineers, making applications for safety improvements on Cliff, at Flora Vista, Mesa Lane, and then also in Las Positas and several other locations.
Isn't some of this just a function of volume? I see Mission, Carrillo, and Upper State, I think is what I'm seeing there. Those are always going to be problematic streets, correct?
Yes, yeah, the certain amount of probability going on there is
Yeah.
that the more people and cars, the greater the probability of interaction.
Right.
Yes, and that's part of his factoring. And he has other figures in his crash analysis that look into that type of filtering.
I know when we had the stimulus money, ARA funds, we used a lot of it for the countdowns on the.
Yes.
And there's still some intersections in the downtown core that don't have them. Is there a plan to add those? I'm thinking on Anapamu and Anacapa Street by the county building and Coffee Cat. There's not one. I mean, that's like a very pretty high volume pedestrian one, for example.
I remember asking that question of Derek and Drew. This goes all the way back when Drew was working on it. And they did the best. They thought they'd pick the most high profile. And I imagine that's something for us to consider in the future and put it on the priority list as far as, what makes the biggest difference as far as bang for the buck.
So there's no plan to add countdown meters in every intersection in the downtown core, for example?
I believe there is.
Oh, there is, okay, but no plan to
The issue is that where is it on the list of priorities of all the other
Right.
improvements that the traffic engineer and others believe would have a more direct input on all modes of safety.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hart?
Just to be clear, that would be in the capital improvement program, those choices.
Yes. For the most part. Sometimes smaller items like that, the operational budget for traffic signals or traffic engineering, they do have certain funds for special projects. And if it's small enough, they have a lot of just do it money, like to install one, to repair a pole, to repair a traffic signal. The CIP is more for larger programmatic issues.
So because that would be a color of money issue, that you could only spend those funds on that type of improvement? The fundamental story you're telling us is that we have a huge and growing backlog in street maintenance. And that's the big story for this budget presentation. And then there's these other issues that are different priorities. But somebody has to make a decision about priority. Should that dollar be spent on addressing that backlog of street funds, or should it be spent on a countdown timer for a signal? Help us understand that decision-making
And
process.
if you look in your budget, I don't know if you have it there, but on page B24, there's right at the top of the page, there's a capital program called Traffic Signal Maintenance and Upgrade Program, and we funded it about $200,000 a year. So much of what Derek does on these small upgrades to traffic signals around the community, he does out of here, and also he gets grant money. So that's kind of what's available in his pot of money every year. And then, of course, he tries to leverage it to do the kinds of things like the countdown, the countdowns, and then a lot of traffic signal upgrades. And I think what's amazing to me is if you just look around town in the last probably 3 or 4 years, Mr. Bailey's been very, very successful in leveraging and getting more done. You can just see it around town. I see it almost, monthly. But that's the source of funding he uses. Now, you could always add to that, but he's also then been real successful in getting grants.
Right, and I'm very familiar with how the grant process and how that you have to leverage these dollars. And yeah, thank you.
Exactly, and the focus of showing this in the slide is that safety is the prior slide on Streets Capital focused on infrastructure, and then go up here to traffic, and we have safety. And so when you're choosing between the two, safety is going to be very important.
And that's where the grant funds are going to go to.
Right.
Because
and so
of the same
he needs to.
calculus
So
at the
he
state
needs
level.
to make the decision between, using his limited capital funds for matching on the safety grants, where you leverage a significant amount of money, or doing mundane things like, fixing the corrosion on the poles on Cabrillo, which is also important. So it's a fine balance, and Derek is very sharp at it. So finally, traffic signals. This is a program that moved, as I noted earlier, to be with Derek, because it's just a more efficient direct link between the traffic engineer and Derek. And we're lucky to have a very talented staff. He and his crew are able to maintain 115 traffic signals, 8 PED flashers, and other infrastructure. And some of the work they can even do themselves. For example, they put in a left-hand turn indicator at Chapala and Haley, which was a safety improvement because of what he saw in the crash analysis. So there's some things that the crew can just do. And then this fiscal year, there had been additional funding due to expected additional utility users tax funding into the program. And that finishes for me. If you have any questions, hand it
Rouse?
off to Browning.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, Pat, we're talking. You had earlier on talking about public outreach, and I know we've talked frequently about the GIS program and how public can find out what's scheduled, what's coming, and as you dovetail that with SCE's proposed work and whatnot. If constituents want to find out when their area is scheduled for paving, when there's going to be street closures, when there's going to be maintenance done, is that something that's accessible yet online?
It should be accessible right now on the Engineering Division website. We have 2 maps, one for the hard hats that show the construction progress, and the other is a pencil that shows proposed construction. Now, it may take some navigating because, like some of the pavement maintenance are all over town, so sometimes you have to drill down a little bit to find out, which streets are being done. But we're working to maintain and keep that information up to date.
And as Edison comes forth with their permits to do their work on scheduled maintenance, not on emergency issues,
Correct.
will that work be on that information side as well?
That is not planned right now for that type of work. Once we know more about what Edison is doing, we can look and see if they're doing really invasive work. We are requiring them to do some contact. Part of the problem with dealing with utilities, as you all know, they'll promise to be there on Friday, and then things come up and they end up being there on Tuesday instead.
Yeah, I've read about that somewhere.
Yeah. So we work hard to maintain a good connection and with them. And currently, right now, we have a really nice collaborative relationship with our Edison staff. They're reasonably cooperative, as we can expect them to be.
And
things happen.
And lastly, we've been speaking about a policy for years about work in the downtown corridor during the middle of the day hours and whatnot. Is that information disseminated to people when they get permits that are subcontractors, not city projects per se, but Edison or one of the utilities or whatever? Do they know that they can't tear up State Street at 12:30 on a Friday?
Well, yes, it's available. And some pay more attention to others, and so we're getting better at making sure everybody pays attention to that.
Yeah. And last thing is a request, and this covers more than just this presentation, but there are slides. I don't know about anybody else up here, but I can't see the numbers up there, and I can't read them on here. And something like slide 21 has some really valuable information that is going to remain a secret to us all. So I was wondering if there's a way to preview these PowerPoints before we get them, to either make that legible or bigger, or cut the text off the top so we can get to the numbers, or somehow on our handouts, because it's a little frustrating. You're talking about it. I know you can see it, but it's all yours.
Right. Well, I apologize for that. I made a leap because it was out of the 6-year CIP, so it is public information. But next time I'll won't do this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not just this particular presentation, but in general, we're
Okay.
looking at these, and we're looking there, and we're looking at each other like, you got some senior citizens up here, so got to be.
I can relate.
respectful.
I'm right there with you.
Mr. Hart?
Just to that point specifically, it would be really helpful to have these before the meeting. Not just sitting up here looking at these, because there's all the information that you're telling us is in this PowerPoint. We could think about the questions we're going to ask rather than just doing it on the fly. So as much for all departments, not just you, just for budget, actually everything, but particularly for this, because there's a lot of detailed information.
Very good.
And then we had a big discussion yesterday about representations for neighborhoods, and the fundamental driving reason for that conversation is a perception that some neighborhoods do better than others in terms of this exact stuff: sidewalks, streets, probably sidewalks and streets and bridges.
Lighting.
And so I think we need to know very precisely, historically, going back some period of time, how has money been spent by neighborhood? And you described the 6 districts for street maintenance, but the sidewalk repairs, I don't believe that they're not part of that 6-block thing. They're done as needed, and there are disproportionately missing sidewalk segments in particular neighborhoods. There's actually lots of neighborhoods that don't even have sidewalks and don't want sidewalks, and that's part of the conversation, I think. But obviously this is not part of this budget conversation, but this will be very important information for that other conversation, is to truly look in an analytical way is how has the money been spent, and why has it been spent that way? And people are going to want to know some pretty detailed, fine-grained information about that, because I think the story is very different than the perception is. And making that argument is going to take some facts.
Right, and we've done that over time, and we have the records to do that, and we'll get started on doing that.
Thank you. And then one thing, I have a question that I think is a tweener between departments and tweener between divisions. We have recently re-engaged in cleaning up illegal encampments. And I don't know which department. Is that Public Works that has to do that work? Is that it's a combination of a bunch of different departments, but the hard, physically picking up the stuff. If we were going to do something with contracting, as opposed to relying on swap workers, is this where you would put this?
This could be a wonderful segue.
There we go. I
Here is
planned
Browning.
it this way.
Thank you, Browning.
Except we have other questions for you, Mr.
But
Kelly.
first-
Mr. Kelly, we still have some other questions, so hold
I-
that thought, and
just wanting
Mr.
to know
Allen
where
will
to start speaking
answer
about
that part
so
of the question.
there you go.
First, just to follow up on Mr. Hart's point on where the capital improvements have happened, in particular yesterday, the issue about East Side department neighborhood. It'd be great to have the number of how much money in capital improvements have happened in that area in the last, 5-6 years or something like that. And I bet the answer would be a big number because of all the special work that's happened there. But that would be a good number to know, and I think we
Okay.
answer some of those questions.
How about 5 and 10 years?
Yeah, that would be great.
And I think you need to include the Cacique Street undercrossing in that calculation. I don't know that that would show up on our side of the
Probably
equation,
not,
but that's
but-
an extremely
Yeah.
large investment
Yep.
and a very important public infrastructure.
Good point. Ms. Murillo.
Thank you. But along Cacique Street, we do have the footbridge that I think needs some painting, and the street looks a little beaten up through there. And that was part of the discussion yesterday from East Side residents and their perception that it's a representation issue. The last storm event we had, the footbridge was closed for a couple of days over the weekend, and I went out there to look at it, and I wouldn't say eyesore, but and I don't know how to put in a request except during this kind of a conversation, if someone could look at a cleanup or a cosmetic, I know replacing the footbridge is part of the capital plan in the future. But maybe people would feel they were respected if it just looked a little bit better. And maybe we can, if I would request that we take a look at it to just make it look better. And then I had a sewer question. Is that for you?
Wastewater will be towards the end of the
Okay.
presentation.
Then I'm done. Thanks.
Mr. Hotchkiss.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Following up on what Mr. Rouse said, do we coordinate, this is for you, Mr. Mayor, do we coordinate what's the streets are doing repair-wise with, let's say, tree trimming and other things? Because sometimes, a street can get really jammed up when you got two of those in it, and the left hand doesn't appear to know what the right hand is doing.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hotchkiss, to the extent we can coordinate, we do try to do so, but we have found it can be very challenging to do so, particularly on maintenance types of activities, because although they may be planned, things happen that change those schedules.
Well, at least we could go out and look. I can tell you it makes a huge PR impression negatively when you go for a block and then you hit another block and it's in a whole different department. It's like, God, don't these people know what they're doing? And it seems like we don't. So the only way I can see correcting that is if a supervisor goes out and goes, oops, we're making a mistake here.
And I think you saw Pat's slide about Lower State Street. That's an example of the kinds of situations where we try and look ahead, particularly for big projects, and where we know some of them are public, some of them are private. We're going to need to do coordination, even though they may be private projects, and to look ahead in situations where we can anticipate them so we can have a planned approach to coordinating work. We can look again at the maintenance issues. They're a little more challenging because they move so quickly, but I certainly understand what you're talking about.
So when we have, like, we're working on a street, does somebody go out there and not only see if it's being done correctly, but do we have a problem that we couldn't foresee? I don't want to I don't want to tell you how to do your job, please. Don't misunderstand.
Well,
It's okay.
arguably, these things can be foreseen. Part of it is, and I'm speaking maybe for some of the maintenance groups here, is that how much time and effort is being spent in coordination and how much time is being spent doing the job. So they try to balance that reasonably.
Yeah, I realize I'm talking about an ideal world, but I just want to present that as a thought that maybe you can maintain. Do we have, Mr. Kelly, do we have any upcoming revolutionary technology that's going to apply to any of what we do here? Because technology is changing so fast. I say that I don't know really what I'm asking. But.
Well, actually, we installed a permit, not a permit tracking, public works permit tracking system that we've had for some time. We're getting better at it. And it's been focused on utility temporary traffic control that's been planned and for public works improvements. And we're working on reaching that and trying to make it attractive to all the maintenance groups so they can look at it too. But then again, they got to spend the time inputting the data, reading the data, coordinating the data. And so we're working on making it easy for that to happen. And that's matter of fact, that's a goal for us this fiscal year to engage the maintenance crews. But, it's at their discretion. And we're trying to make it attractive to them.
Is wireless technology coming into traffic control these days with lights and rather than big controllers that are on the sidewalk?
Well, Derek can best speak to that as to the size of controllers. That's one of my challenges to him. But it's interesting. Some elements of the computer technology, even though our components within our phone have gotten smaller, the traffic signal controllers seem to get bigger. It's an irony there. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that Derek explained to me that I can't repeat right now. But part of it is like, battery backups and higher levels of standard of care of redundant work is the best explanation I have.
Thank you very much.
Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Back to pavement. Our budget is less than what is needed to maintain our grade level, whatever that is. Can we forecast, it seems to me, I'm thinking back to the State of the City address of a couple of years ago that Mr. Wozniak was opining on where we're headed. And I'm wondering, is it dependent on weather and some other I can imagine heavy rainfall is an ingredient in. That's a good news about a drought, is we probably don't have as much street wear as in heavy rainfall. Do we have a way of forecasting where we're headed and when with our grade?
Yes, we are forecasting that, and we've had several iterations of how much lower our pavement condition index will go if our level of funding continues. And it, as you would expect, it's going to continue to get lower.
Right. I think that would be a useful piece of information to provide regularly.
Okay.
With the budget, and I think just, again, it's obviously a topic that Mr. Rouse and I are trying to share with our community. And but I just think the opportunities that we get to educate our folks is we should take advantage of all of them.
John and his crew have and his staff have been working up these types of scenarios for that infrastructure subcommittee.
Great. Thank you.
Mr. Hart.
I think I'm back to Councilmember Rouse's question about that slide that we can't see. What is the total amount of streets capital funding then, including the general fund new one-time $500,000 contribution?
Well, it's not there because that's a 6-year CIP slide from a year and a half ago. It's in this current streets capital. And this current streets capital is $2.9 million.
$2.9 million. And that's with the extra $500,000 this year?
Correct.
Okay, great. I guess I'll just do a quick little tangent. I'm sorry about transportation funding. It seems appropriate. The problem fundamentally is the gas tax. People expect that when they pay more for gas has gotten a lot more expensive, probably gone up 40, 50 cents in the last month. And they think that generates more gas tax to state, local governments to do road maintenance. It doesn't. The gas tax is a fixed amount per gallon. It hasn't changed since 1990. The purchasing value of that dollar from 1990 is less than half of what it was. Cars get a lot better gas mileage now because they're higher technology, they're more fuel efficient, so they drive more miles and used less gas. So the the graphs, if you were to show it in terms of use of roads versus revenue that's generated by that use is going down, whereas the costs are going up. So our problem is not unique to the city of Santa Barbara. Our pavement condition index is not unique to the city of Santa Barbara. It is pretty much almost exactly, I think, what the statewide pavement quality index is for local governments. It's pretty much the same for the state of California too. It's, there's a range. It's a very, very narrow band between the communities that are doing the best and the communities that are doing the worst, because fundamentally the transportation financing system is broken. And it's broken at the state level, it's broken at the federal level, because neither the state or the federal gas tax has been raised since 1990. And so we can do our best to fix that. And I think what local communities in California have done is pass transportation sales tax measures like Measure A and originally Measure D as a way to supplement that funding. People got frustrated and said, we can't rely on the state legislature to fix our roads, so we're going to increase our own taxes at our local level. We're going to use that money. Measure A generates $3.3 million for the city of Santa Barbara for that purpose specifically, and a lot for the whole county. And if it weren't for that, we would have a $3.3 million hole in addition to the hole that we have today. And the road quality would never have gotten to 63. It'd probably be an average of 40 or 50 or something like that. So that's a problem. That's not unique to us, but it's part of the conversation, I think, that the Infrastructure Committee has to consider as well. And maybe, as a goal, we ought to at least be shooting for a capital budget that equals the Measure A revenue that we get. We're not really that far off. We're at 2.9. The 3.3 is something I think that's achievable in that context.
Mr. White?
Mayor.
Although the Measure A 3.3 goes to more than streets, so the 2.9 is just streets. I bet if you added the MTD and the other stuff, oh no, that's Measure A. Well, I guess, right, but.
That's its own allocation.
Right.
But your point is, you're right, it goes for a lot more things. Street tree maintenance, sidewalks, there are lots of things.
Yeah. Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I can picture if we could get one blob of that tax information, a graph that going into the infrastructure roadshow that's just showing that diminishing gas tax revenue, that might be a useful piece to at least for us to look at and see whether the story gets too complicated or not, but maybe that would help.
Okay. Now we need to transition to whatever it was Mr. Hart said 10 minutes ago to Mr. Allen. Yeah. No, what was the question? Oh, the encampments, dealing with cleanups. Right. Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Browning Allen, the transportation manager. I'll cover your question in when I get to the street maintenance portion of the budget. So I'm the transportation manager, Public Works Department. So our department has three main sections: street maintenance, transportation planning, and downtown parking. Within that, we have our access and parking or development review section, the transit assistance. We call it transportation drainage and system maintenance, which is basically the street maintenance staff members, the street sweeping program, and then our downtown parking program. This here is an overview of all the revenue that we have coming into the streets program. It's the money that we use for street maintenance. Our capital is in here. Mr. Kelly mentioned that Derek Bailey is paid out of the streets fund. That's reflected and it comes out of this revenue as well as folks in transportation planning. So, Mr. Hart mentioned the gas tax. So we're showing that we're seeing a $374,000 reduction in gas tax for FY15. We get this revenue estimate from the state of California. This is what they estimate our gas tax revenues will be for next fiscal year. We are also proposing a one-time use of reserves in Measure A money for our streets capital for next fiscal year. Moving over to the expenditure side, there's some minor adjustments we're looking at, some changes. So in the supplies and services area, primary areas there, we're looking at reduction in some non-contractual area in terms of street maintenance, moving some money around, as well as some reduction in the roadway maintenance, and then moving some electrical costs from traffic signals into special projects. In the special projects area, we've reduced the money. Let's see, where's the special projects? I already covered that. Let's go down here to these two areas here, the transfers to Parks and Rec. This one here is, we are moving into next fiscal year coming July 1, where the Parks and Recreation Department will be taking over the maintenance of all the landscape within the public right-of-way. So the medians, the traffic circles, and public parkways that we've been maintaining. So we are transferring $50,000 additional from streets to Parks and Recreation to help offset some of those additional costs. The $75,000 additional transfer represents reimbursing the risk management fund for the Eden Park or Eden Place judgment we received a while back, and this is going to be done over the next 10 years to reimburse the streets fund, the risk management fund. So I want to talk about transportation planning. Members of the land development team, we work closely with the community development staff as well as engineering. In reviewing projects, our staff also works closely with Derek Bailey in reviewing projects. We are now seeing an uptick in the amount of projects that are coming through the door. So our staff is getting a little bit more busy than we have been in the past. We are involved with regional transportation coordination. I serve as a member of the Technical Transportation Committee with SBCAG. In fact, we got a meeting tomorrow morning. I am the chair. I think this is my 4th year as chair. Rob Dayton also is involved with SBCAG matters. We're also charged with working with the Community Development Department with the implementation of the updated general plan. Rob is a member of the project development team with the 101 HOV lane project. And then we serve as staff support to our Transportation and Circulation Committee. The area of transit assistance, we do have a contract with MTD for the downtown waterfront shuttle. And I'll talk a little bit more about some challenges we have with the shuttle. But we do have a contract with MTD. The majority of the expenses to pay for that contract is paid for out of Measure A funds, roughly $580,000. We also have a contract with Easy Lift Transportation to provide ADA paratransit services for our community. We manage the Safe Route to School program. We have a contract with Coast. They go into the elementary schools throughout our community to do hazard assessments and offer bicycle training and other Safe Route to School training programs for elementary age school children. We have our city employee work trip program that we also manage. This is a program that we started about 6 years ago. It's a very popular program. We have seen a number of employees who have taken advantage of this program, and we've seen the number of single occupant car trips into the city by our employees reduce significantly since we implemented this program. A very popular program. We also have our bicycle program. We have a fleet of city bicycles that we have available for our staff to use to go between offices. We actually have employees use the city bike to do a site visit. So we have 4 at the Public Works Yard. We have a couple here at City Hall. Streets has one. We have a couple of downtown parking. And if another department wants a bike, we will provide a bicycle for them and a locker. We also maintain the bikes. We make sure they're in good operation condition. But a part of that, we offer a bicycle skill class to make sure our employees actually know how to ride and know the rules of the road and ride their bicycles safely, and so we don't have any issues with that. One effort that we are embarking on is the update of our city's bicycle master plan. The last comprehensive update of the plan was done back in 1997-98. It's due to be updated every 20 years. We got a Measure A grant through the Measure A South Coast program to assist us with the paying for that, and we'll be coming to council in the next month or so, giving an update of how we're going to go forward with that program. We did go to our Transportation Circulation Committee last week to give them an update on the efforts that we're doing with that matter. We also go after grants. We work closely with the engineering staff as well as Derek Bailey and traffic operations to identify and apply for grants. We've been very successful in receiving grants, both in engineering as well as in transportation. We got quite a few Measure A grants, community development block grants, and we're in the process of writing at least 2, maybe 4 grants under the state active transportation program. One of them is for the replacement of the bridge at Cacique Street. We're also looking at possibly adding a bridge over the creek linking Soledad where there's not a bridge, as well as looking at the bridge on Montecito Street near the Five Points Roundabout, and there's a couple of sidewalk projects we're also looking at adding. One thing that we are not doing is we do not have budgeted adding new sidewalks where sidewalks are missing. As Mr. Kelly mentioned, most of the money is going towards maintenance and safety projects, and we have not put money in terms of our city discretionary funds and sidewalks. Any new sidewalks we've been putting in the last few years have been done using grant funds that we have been successful in receiving, and then we use the city funds as matching funds for those grants.
The Sarah Grant, who left the position there, is there was a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago, there was some reorganization in the department there, and then Sarah came back. And is that position just being replaced as is? Is it being moved around a bit, or what's the status?
It's on hold right now, so we're evaluating what we're going to do with that position and the duties that Sarah performed.
Okay, and perhaps it's part of the bicycle master plan conversation, just in terms of timing and getting things accomplished. I know there were some questions 1 or 2 years ago about various projects and timelines and staffing and that kind of thing. So it's vacant right now. Is that correct?
That's correct. Sarah left last Thursday.
Right. Okay.
Madam Mayor?
Yep.
May I express my support for filling that position as soon as you can? I think it's a really important function. Now I'm riding a bike around town, and so I have some self-interest, as well as speaking for people who ride bikes. Thank you. Other people.
Okay, and then we have a contract with an organization called Bike Station, and we oversee the contract we have with Bike Station. The Bike Station is currently located at the Granada Garage. I think we're in year 7 of that facility being operated, and we will be going out to construction this summer to do the Bike Station module, and basically a satellite over in Lot 3 adjacent to the MTD Transit Center over on Figueroa Street. So at that facility, we'll be able to add another 20 to 30 bicycles. In terms of the downtown,
Mr. Allen, is it my understanding the bike station contract remains the same even with the 2 stations it was with the 1?
that is correct. The contract is for $25,000. They have a base amount of, I believe it's $18,000, and there's incentives in there for them to get the additional money. Part of it is participating in community events like Earth Day that we just had this past weekend, as well as increasing the membership in the bike station.
But that line item should
The
remain
line
the
item
same.
will remain constant at $25,000. We work really hard to negotiate and keep it at $25,000 to operate both facilities, because primarily it's done remotely, and we want most of our efforts to spend in increasing the membership and marketing the program. The downtown waterfront shuttle. We talked about this last year. The Wharf to Harbor service is underperforming. It's a service similar to what we experienced, a little bit better, but almost like the Carrillo commuter lot we talked about a couple of years ago, where it was really underperforming. It's this type of service that we were taking a look at. Is this something that's really worth spending the money for? But in talking to MTD, we have cruise ships that come into town. In fact, we have one in town today. And MTD provides 2 or 3 extra shuttles when the cruise ship is in town to provide a way for the passengers to get to downtown Santa Barbara. MTD would not be able to provide what they call a booster service if we did not provide the shuttle service to the harbor, because they don't do specialized transit service. So it has to be one of the regular fixed routes. So in order to maintain that and basically keep the project in the contract and budget, we need to look at some options. So the cost for that service is $86,000. MTD estimates the fare box associated with the Stearns Wharf to the harbor of $9,200. So we're looking at having the waterfront department pay towards the contract for the downtown waterfront shuttle $76,942 for next fiscal year and moving forward.
And that's about a $30,000 increase to the waterfront, and we just felt that they should be responsible for that leg, and they've included it in the proposed budget for the waterfront.
The money they're getting from the tenders to and from the cruise ships could, I think, cover the $30,000. Yeah.
Street maintenance section. So these are the staff that you'll see out there taking care of a variety of things, from painting curbs to replacing. This is the case here on the bottom right, where they're taking care of a root problem in the street. So they do pavement. So we have a concrete crew and an asphalt crew. So the asphalt crew will go out and do pothole repair, skim patch. Sometimes they'll do an overlay. They will dig out, a street that we have uplifted tree roots and replace it. We do have an issue in our streets as well as our sidewalks in terms of tree roots. Anapamu and Quarantine are two streets that come to mind whenever I talk about tree roots in terms of the condition of the road. The road is almost as bad as a sidewalk. We do also have a concrete repair crew, and they do not only replace concrete, they also will grind concrete to remove a trip hazard. The ramp, or we call it asphalt pad, but basically put a ramp on the sidewalk to eliminate a lip. And then they also take care of the bricks on State Street and Carrillo Street. We go out with the downtown organization on a quarterly basis to take a look at the condition of the entire street, but the brick as well as the landscape, working with Parks and Recreation. And they'll address any areas where the pavers may have settled and pull them out, recompact it, and put them back in. And we have roughly 7 million square feet of sidewalk in the city. If you figure on an average sidewalk 5 feet in width, 500-foot length street, that's about 2,500 square feet of sidewalk. So we do about 30,000 square feet of sidewalk by contract on an annual basis, and then we do another 8,000 to 10,000 square feet of sidewalk that we replace with our crews, and we take care of sidewalks that we can't wait for the annual contract. Things that we've identified either through a complaint, through risk management, or staff going out, something that really can't wait to address with the contract. So between the contracting and city staff, we replace about 45,000 square feet of sidewalk on an annual basis.
Madam Mayor, how many miles is that?
I don't know how many miles, but I did a real quick calculation. It's roughly 2,800 blocks if an average block is, with a sidewalk 5 feet in width and 500 feet in length. So
2,800 blocks,
2,800 blocks.
10 blocks per mile, 280. So that's the same as the street length.
Pretty much, yeah.
That seems odd, but I guess there's a lot of streets that don't have sidewalks. So then, and there's sidewalks on both sides. So that's why it seems odd to me that it would be the same. But I guess there are a lot more streets without sidewalks. Yeah. Okay, so use about the same number.
Yeah, there are a number of streets in the San Roque neighborhood where when we did put together the sidewalk infill program back in the 90s, they didn't have a desire to put sidewalks in. And in the Riviera area, there wasn't a desire to put sidewalks in. But there are other areas where we have identified where we have missing links. And so we have identified them. They have been scored in terms of how they would qualify for sidewalk should we have the funds to go forward with putting a sidewalk in.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Allen, what unit do you use to estimate, cost per whatever square, whatever you use? I mean, how do you figure out what you're going to have to spend to replace, not to put a new sidewalk on, but replace an existing sidewalk? If you have to 1,000 square feet, is there a plug number you use to say this is the kind of budget we're going to need for that?
Well, what we do, we get annually. In the streets capital. We receive $250,000 annually in the streets capital budget, and that's a fixed.
That go as far as you can. Is that
we make it go as far as it can? So our staff in streets, they know how much it's costing them when they go out and buy a load of concrete, and they can do some takeoffs, and they double check with engineering, and we always identify more locations for replacement than we think we're going to be able to afford to do in case we get a very good bid. We'd rather be in a position where we're not going to do quite as many versus scrambling to find some additional areas. But we've never had a problem spending all the money.
Right. Just as we go forth in our little effort here to be able to, because that's going to be one of our things is going to be sidewalk repair as well. I mean, we've got good street information, but I'm not sure we're as up to speed on the sidewalk issues.
Right. One of the things, if we have half of our sidewalks in the city need some attention, it would take us about 60 to 65 years to replace the sidewalks. But we all know that some of the sidewalks, like on Anapamu and other streets, where we might go in and replace the sidewalk because of the tree root, and when in less than 5 years it's uplifted again and we have to go back out there and address it again. So there's not a real magic number as to how often we have to go in there. It really depends upon the species of trees that has been planted on the street and how invasive the roots are. And so we work closely with the Parks and Recreation, the city arborists, when we go out and identify a street that we're going to do some repair work on, and we'll trim as much of the route as we can before putting a new sidewalk in. But it's a challenge for us.
So you mentioned that 60, 65 years to fix the sidewalks. You don't know off the top of your head how long? Well, I guess at this point, we're not spending money on missing sidewalk links unless it's a grant-funded situation.
That's correct. And when we were receiving, I think it was back in the early 2000s, we were receiving roughly $400,000 a year towards the Missing Links program. And back then, we estimated it would take about 100 years to address all the missing links.
That helps a lot. Thanks.
And then we have a paint crew, so we have a crew that goes out and does the centerline striping, legends, stop bars, curb painting, anything that requires paint in the public right-of-way. They're responsible for doing that. We also have basically a one-person graffiti removal crew. Sometimes we will supplement that with an hourly employee. They address calls that come in on the hotline on a daily basis. There's some areas where they know it's going to get tagged and on a regular basis, and they go out there on the first thing and take care of those, and then they address the complaints. Our staff is really good at taking care of graffiti, usually the same day the complaint comes in, but no more than 2 days. We do have an ordinance in place that requires private property owners to remove graffiti within 3 days of them being noticed of the need to remove it. Most of our residents are really good at removing graffiti within a time frame. Some of them take a little bit longer. Some of them get a little upset because they've been hit with graffiti over and over and over again and are tired of taking care of it. But eventually they do remove it because they understand it looks bad for their business or their home if they keep the graffiti on. But they are frustrated because they are victims of a crime, but they do work with us. In the ordinance, we do have the ability to go to a hearing before the Public Works Director, but in, I think, the 8 years since the council adopted the graffiti abatement ordinance, we've never had to go as far as to have a hearing and gone on private property and place a lien on the property for recovering our cost.
We also, if the property owner gives us consent, we can go and fix something right away. Isn't there a process related to that, or no?
Not anymore.
There was.
There used to be a process for
Okay.
that when we were receiving general fund monies to
Right.
support the graffiti program, but when we had to cut back on the general fund expenses, we eliminated going on the private property. The only private property that we do go taking care of graffiti on is on the Union Pacific Railroad right-of-way.
Right.
And we have an agreement with them, and they reimburse
They
us for our
reimburse.
costs.
I wonder if that's a beat coordinator discussion too, if there's particular hot spots of private property that keeps getting tagged, to create some arrangement to help for that quick turnaround that might reduce the tagging from, if the private property owner takes a little longer than we would, for example. I mean, maybe there's some arrangement for reimbursement and things like that, but if it's a timing issue, I don't know if that's something to talk with the PD about.
Yeah, we can talk to the police department about that. We do communicate with them whenever we go out and take care of graffiti. We take a picture of it, we send it to the police department, and we have been able to get reimbursed restitution for our costs for removing graffiti. And there's one business that's off the freeway that's been hit on a regular basis, and we're working closely with the police department, the beat coordinator in the area, and they've been talking to the business owner about doing some things to assist them at hopefully catching the person, or at least
Right.
addressing
That
it.
would be the ultimate,
Yeah.
goal.
And unfortunately, we catch one guy and somebody else comes in. It's an
Yeah.
ongoing cycle. But most of the graffiti we find in town is taggers. This guy's just going out and they just want to paint something just to make their mark in town.
Or even under community development and trying to find, like, for example, some of the freeway walls have, the vines on it, or other ways of using foliage or some other kind of material that wouldn't show graffiti, or places that are good, visible, hot spots. I'm not talking about all over the city, but I don't know. But again, I'm just thinking out loud. Thanks.
That's something we have talked about in the past with the city's neighborhood improvement task force, and we'll bring it up again. We tried that on the Union Pacific Railroad right away, and the problem was it didn't get enough water and didn't get a good rain, and then they didn't survive. So.
I'm not suggesting we add water to things,
Yeah.
but yeah.
And then we take care of street signs. So, Mr. Kelly mentioned Derek Bailey is issuing a lot of work orders. So a lot of the work orders, the work that Derek does, he comes over to the streets folks, whether it be putting up a new sign, painting something differently in the street, removing or adding curb marking. So So there's really good close coordination between engineering and transportation, whether it be the transportation planners or the staff in the street maintenance section. We do emergency response. We had that pretty significant rainstorm on March 1st. We did have some issues in town where staff were called out. We were at the Laguna Pump Station. We staffed that throughout the weekend to make sure that the water was draining out of the channel. We also have a contract with Union Pacific for the cleanup of the right-of-way. They do reimburse us for their costs. We have hit the entire UP right-of-way a couple of times, so we're not doing the major cleanup this year. We're just going to do some touch-up, and we'll see how things are next year and maybe pick it up again. We also do neighborhood cleanup that has been placed on hold for most of this fiscal year, primarily because of the loss of the swap workers. But we are working with the county. I just think it was yesterday we got a draft agreement in from the county that we needed to sign to move forward with now receiving the swap workers again. And we'll be bringing that to council in the next few weeks for your approval so we can bring the swap workers back in. It's a valuable resource that the county wants to give us, and we would like to use them so we can take care of some of these cleanups. We've looked at other ways to take care of the cleanups, trying to find a contractor might not be the most cost-effective way. If we tried using contractors to do some of our weed abatement, and we did that last year, and 2 contractors opted out after a couple of days because they underestimated how much work it was going to take. So this type of work is not the most easy and nicest work to do. Some of the things that they find in some of these encampments would turn your stomach. So we are working with this, and we hope to have swap workers back up and running this summer again, if not sooner. And
this is just one of those areas of high that's such a high priority that whatever our backup is, it seems to me, I mean, we've talked about it as even getting back and relating to our issues on State Street. And so I see Mr. Armstrong has his light on. I think that we just need to have the backup plans
and
there.
we are committed to cleaning up the encampments. And if there's not sufficient swap workers, then we will hire part-timers to assist. So we're committed to doing it, and we were trying to be patient with the county. We finally got the agreement, and we're going to get it to you guys as quickly as possible and reinitiate the program. And if we can't get enough swap workers, we're going to figure out another way to do it, because we know we're very committed to it. And just there was a coordination. Typically, Councilmember Hart asked about how does it work. Typically, the police department identifies the encampments, and then they need to be posted 72 hours before we clean it up so that the folks can take their valuables away. And then when the cleanup actually happens, because of the state law on unclaimed property, as we go through those cleanups, we can't just take dumpsters out there and dump it all in the dumpster. We need to go through the materials, and then anything that has a value greater than $50, it needs to be isolated, logged, and then it needs to be retained, I think, for 90 days so that people have the ability to claim their property. And that's based on it's based on state law regarding unclaimed property, and also there's been some substantial judgments against other communities who have cleaned up homeless encampments and have not retained these objects, and then they've been sued. And so we're trying to be really careful on that and have a pretty extensive policy.
And whenever we do go out and do a cleanup, like not only did the police department post it, they're out there when our staff shows up in the morning to start the work to make sure there's not any problems, and they go in first to get the individuals out of there before our staffs go in there and start doing the work. Some of the other things we had talked about, whether it be hire part-time or hourly employees, or if we can't find enough, then we'll just work with parks and to see if we can coordinate. Maybe quarterly, one day we just go out and do cleanups. But we're going to address them. But hopefully the swap workers work out. They worked out really well, and hopefully we have a sufficient amount of swap workers, where we can do this on a regular basis. But the police department is the one that identifies the locations for us.
Mr. Hart?
Well, I know we have, I think, 2 people in the audience that probably want to speak to this issue. I don't know what you want to do with
I'm
public
going to
comment.
have the public, as soon as Mr. Allen's done, they're going to speak to that.
Well, I just think that
downtown parking
the
as
news
well.
that we're committed, that we're going to figure it out, we're going to solve the problem. That's the most important thing. I think there's an element to this too in terms of coordinating with Caltrans, maybe about potential different barriers to people getting into their property. Caltrans's property, I think, is some of the worst places where this occurs, and I don't know that they're going to have resources to help in a significant way, but thinking about a high-level conversation with them about, okay, what could the city do potentially with resources to do additional fencing and barriers to make it impossible for people to get right back in. I think we're going to hear a story about a recent really great cleanup where that was rehabilitated, within days after being cleaned up, and that's, if we could, it's just like the graffiti. It's the exact same thing. Have to get after it. And if all these steps that are involved, this is the law, we have to do that. But maybe preventing people from getting in there in the first place is another part of the longer-term strategy, about being successful about that.
Yeah, we do work closely with Caltrans, and we have gone on Caltrans property to clean up. And for example, when we did the UP cleanup, Caltrans would come out there with their crafts equipment. In fact, they even took down some fence material to make it easier for the California Conservation Crew staff that we hired to go in there and do the work. So we work closely with Caltrans, the CHP, as well as our police department. The one thinking of the one you're talking about, we did a cleanup a few months ago. Staff went in there, Caltrans repaired the fence, and then they came in and tore it down again. So, unfortunately, unless you put concrete block walls in, they're going to cut the chain link and still get in the areas where we don't want them. So we will continue to work with the police department, and we'll repair things and get the cleanups, and it's going to be an ongoing process, and hopefully if we continue to remove enough of the things that they are finding to hide under, they'll go someplace else. And then we're involved in special event cleanups. We have a variety of special events throughout the year. Some of the big ones staff is involved with setting up for is the annual Fiesta Parade, July 4th Parade, Solstice Parade, State Street Mile, the Holiday Parade, and a variety of other special events that may come up during the year. Street sweeping program. So we have been sweeping our city residential streets since 2002. We were doing commercial prior to that. We're doing about 80% of the city streets. The ones we identified that we're sweeping, we feel confident it's safe to sweep those streets without having any type of safety issues, whether it be with a sweeper or resident driving on the street. We're sweeping about 17,000 curb miles per year. We do not sweep on recognized city holidays. I know last year a resident got a ticket on Veterans Day. That's not a recognized city holiday. It's posted on the website that we do sweep on that day. We've been sweeping on Veterans Day since we started the program. The only holiday that we do sweep on that's a recognized holiday is Cesar Chavez Day. It's a relatively new holiday, and we're under conversation about possibly not sweeping that day. The days that we don't sweep, parking enforcement doesn't do the citations. We also don't sweep on a day where it's raining. If it's drizzling, we're probably going to sweep. If we tell the residents, you go outside, you look in the gutter, if there's water flowing in the street, in the gutter, it's safe to park your car there because we're not going to sweep because we'll be sucking up more water than debris, and it's not going to be very effective. We're still collecting over almost 7 million, almost 4 million pounds of debris on an annual basis. We have not seen the amount of debris reduce significantly since we started the program. The areas where we're finding the most are on the west side and the east side, especially the west side. It's an area where downtown Workers Park, we have a lot of trees in that neighborhood. It's just a lot of stuff we're pulling off, and we pull a variety of things. This is a fairly clean, but when we first started the program, we're pulling bottles, cans, you name it, we're pulling it out. Now it's mostly vegetation.
This might be an opportunity for me to share with the full council some conversations I've had with Mr. Allen and Mr. Armstrong about this program. In the eastern Riviera area, Eucalyptus Hill area, at least as one, there are, as I understand it, there are criteria for streets that are eligible to get sweeping, which is they can't be too steep and they must have a curb. And there are a number of streets in that area that qualify but have not been receiving sweeping. And so I have asked that the staff to at least investigate the concept of, and there are other areas that are comparable. If you have Bel Air, Knowles as an example would be an area where it's got some slope and it's not downtown and it's getting sweeping. Now it isn't nearly as often as I understand it as downtown. There's going to be much higher frequency in the urban center. But I'm asking for at least a look at a fairness issue there of getting that same sort of low frequency sweeping for all streets that qualify physically for that. And so I think that, as I understand it, that's in the works, but at least this is an opportunity for me to share that with the full council.
So this slide here is just showing where the money is coming from to take care of our street sweeping program. So transfers in from streets, this goes into the commercial program. So this covers the cost of the commercial sweeping program. This next number is our estimated of parking citation revenues that we're going to be receiving in the areas where we do enforcement. And then the amount of Measure B money that we're receiving. In the past, we had a fixed amount of Measure B money. It started at, I think, $150,000, and we've been increasing it by, I think it was 3% a year. And we're taking a different tactic this year and reducing it by $87,000. And basically, what we're looking at is with the total cost of the program, how much we're receiving in parking citation revenue, and Measure B would make up the difference. So this year will show our actual expenses for next fiscal year.
And just so it's clear what we did there, go back to that last slide, Browning, is as you recall, when Measure B was adopted, the idea was, one of the big selling points is we were going to use that to initiate residential street sweeping, which we weren't doing. And we were doing commercial street sweeping, and that was paid for through the Streets Fund. And the idea was is we weren't going to use Measure B to supplement the things that were already being done. And so there was a lot of startup cost, and then we brought on the citation revenue. And the Creeks folks, for the last 2 or 3 years, you may recall, have been expressing concern that their contribution may be greater. And so we've broken out what's the commercial sweeping we do, what's the residential, and basically between the citation revenue and that $115,000 from Measure B, that covers the full cost of the residential street sweeping program. And then the 150 goes towards the commercial. And the idea is on a go-forward basis is we'll have Measure B make up the gap between what the citation revenue doesn't cover, and then the commercial part will be covered through the Streets Fund, which they were doing in 2000 before we ever started the program. So we wanted to kind of get the equity there and make sure that nobody could accuse us of spending too much Measure B money to supplement.
So one of the things that we have done in terms of our street sweeping program, we've looked at our expenses and moved things around. So, we've been reducing their personnel costs, who's being charged to the program and moving them to other areas in the street maintenance program. Looking at the allocated cost, we moved money from the commercial into the residential program for the allocated cost. That's primarily because the bigger portion, the bigger expense is in the residential versus the commercial. So we're balancing out the program, making sure we stay within the budget. And what we do on a regular basis, we take a look at how the program is working, how the revenue's coming in, and if the revenues are not meeting projection, then we're going to have to make some adjustments, or we'll come to council of possibly maybe wanting to use reserves, but we'll try and make adjustments before we dip in the reserve fund.
What is the trend with citation revenue?
It's pretty flat. It has not really gone up significantly for the last 4 or 5 years.
Has it gone down from its historic highs?
It's gone down. We were close, a little over $1 million when we first started the program. It's gone down. Of course, the police department does get a portion of it. We're now at $48 for a parking ticket for street sweeping. When we started the program, the parking citation was $32. So you're getting close to $50 for a parking ticket. You get 1 or 2 of those, it stings pretty bad. So I think that has had a factor in change in behavior. Some of the people who live in our community not wanting to get a $50 parking ticket.
Just so it's clear, a big part of that increase is because the state has tacked on all these extra charges in the parking ticket.
And this map shows the areas that we're sweeping, both commercial and downtown. It's hard to read. I'll give you all the council a copy of it. But the areas up here in the white there within the city limits, a lot of them are narrow and windy, will be difficult to sweep. We are looking at some of the streets that aren't as windy or steep, that do have curb and gutter, and we'll be evaluating how we could possibly bring those into a sweeping program and how much that would cost. That's something we're taking a look at. Staff's working on it right now, and hope to have some numbers shortly on that. and downtown parking program. So the revenues by major object, hourly parking by far is our major source of revenue in the downtown parking program. It has gone up since the economy started picking up. We're at $4.3 million when we were in the recession. We're now at $4.8 million. The other major area is our parking business assessment, PBIA. Then we have a variety of different fees in here. We have rent that we receive from Metropolitan Theater, residential permit parking, and other type of fees. And then this one here is the interest earnings we receive for the money we have in the bank, as well as the rent we receive from environmental programs and Greyhound. The money we receive from Greyhound for the use at the half of the REA building down the depot lot, we're keeping separate. We're tracking how much money that is, because those are the monies that we use to reinvest in the facility down there. So we're not taking money from other portions of the downtown parking program. I thought this slide was...
Have we heard anything new from the state about the railroad depot parking lots and RDA transfer? And
About a week and a half ago, we received a letter from the state, and they had a whole series of questions about the railroad depot and actually also about the park site. So we're responding to their questions about how does the PBIA work and everything else. So that was the first response we'd had from them since, I think, like the fall when we submitted our long-range property management plan.
thank you.
So we put this slide in here to just give the council an idea of how people are parking. So 59, almost 60% of the people are able to park in our parking system and park for free. Then the next portion is $1.59 and it goes all the way down. So we're seeing most of our revenue in these areas here, and it's amazing that we can generate $4.8 billion with, basically 40% of the people that are coming in. And what we have found, this will kind of put this in perspective, is we are averaging 4.3 million transactions on an annual basis. It really hasn't changed since 2005, 2006. What we're finding is people are staying longer. So primarily we think it's because of the acceptance of the credit card. So we're looking at other things that we can work on, working with possibly the downtown organization, where we can start marketing, hopefully get new people to come in and park in our lots and shop in our downtown. It's amazing that we're at 60% people are still parking for free. And I've been in commercial establishments where you overhear somebody talking, hey, we got to go so we don't have to pay for parking. I feel like saying it's only $1.50. We are looking at making some adjustments to some fees. One is changing the lost ticket or surrender fee. It's pretty complicated. I'm going to go in with a little more detail with the finance subcommittee in a couple of weeks. But basically, we would charge $10, and it would go up to $15, and there's a service charge. And then some people would start, they could, if we don't keep track of it, they might game it and say, I lost my ticket because they only have to pay $10. So we figure, hey, let's make it a flat $15, no matter how many times you lost your ticket. And figure that's pretty reasonable. And it's going to be less staff time spent on that. The other fee.
How often does that happen now?
It's enough where we want to make some changes to this.
I mean, 1,000 times a year, or?
Roughly 1,000. I say a few hundred times a year. I have the number figure back in my office. I can't remember. I'll make sure I have that at the finance subcommittee. I don't think I have it in the information staff gave me. Actually, it's 4,000. 4,000. And what happens if it's a multiple? We go back. We have the driver's or the license plate number. So staff has to go back and look at the data, a database to see if that license plate has had a lost ticket before. And if they have, then we would send them a bill that you not only lost your ticket, you also owe us an additional amount of money. And a lot of times, by the time they receive the bill from the city, they have forgotten that that even occurred. So there's now no question about it. Just pay us $15 if you can't find your ticket. If they find their ticket sometime in the future and they come to the parking office, we'll work with them. We're really a good customer service organization. We're not going to say, hey, sorry, too bad. We'll work with the people. But hopefully the amount of lost tickets will go down. The other fee that we're looking at making changes to is the COTA commuter lot. It's currently at $50 a month. Looking at raising it up to $65 a month. We're oversubscribed in that lot. I think we have a little over 200 spaces, and we have over 300 permittees in there. And we're to the point now where we aren't issuing any more permits because of we were just afraid that we might issue a permit and somebody can't get in there. This still is a really good, reasonable rate for a lot, commuter lot for the employees who are commuting downtown. COTA lot is going to, or the Korea lot is going to remain at $40 a month, but this is a little bit less than 50% of what we're charging at Lot 10. So we don't think there'll be some people not paying, but we don't think there's going to be a significant drop off in the use of the lot. So this gives an idea of the revenues in the downtown parking program. So we're estimating an additional $90,000 for FY15. We're bumping up our PBI up by $100,000.
What does that mean, you're bumping? I mean, you're just charging more? Or
No, we're just estimating, just because
Okay.
the economy's better. We're seeing our PBA revenues coming in better, so we're just increasing our estimated revenue for
Okay.
PBA by $100,000. Same thing with the monthly parking fees. All these are really strong. We are still being conservative because at some point in time, we're not going to see hourly go up. 'Cause if we're talking about the people who are parking our lot and staying longer, not necessarily new people, hopefully we can get more new customers coming in and see this number continue to grow.
And for the most part, what this means is in the current fiscal year, we're doing better than what we expected. And so that's why we're adjusting next year, because this year we're doing better than we expected.
Commuter parking fees, we're lowering this estimate a little bit. This is primarily because of the Carrillo lot. It's just not performing very well. It wasn't, we took the Carrillo commuter shuttle out a few years ago. Some people say it's because of that, but the analysis showed back then nobody was riding the shuttle. So the problem is it's kind of a remote lot and people just don't want to walk that distance. But we know of people who park in the COTA commuter lot and walk the same distance to get their business. So we're not really sure what's going on. So we're working with staff in the downtown parking program to come up with ways to better market or increase the marketing efforts in the Carrillo lot.
What's the month? Is there a monthly parking fees for the Carrillo community lot versus the other lots?
Rio is 40, the COTA is 65, and all of the paid lots, like the Granada Garage, for example, is $155 a month. And the Lot 10 is $135 a month, I believe, and it varies based on the lot. And the only lots that we're actually selling monthly parking permits in are the Granada Garage, Lot 2, which is across the street from Nordstrom on Cannon Perdido at Chapala, and Lot 10. All the other lots are pretty much impacted, and we are not selling monthly permits in.
So the Carrillo lot is actually cheaper than most of the private sources around for monthly parking.
That's correct.
By quite a bit.
There's been a couple of private lots who use our lots to establish their rates, and they've been asking us to bump the rates up in the Carrillo lot. So, but the Carrillo lot still is a good value. It's only a few blocks to the downtown, and hopefully we can get more people using it.
And how many people do we have subscribed in that program right now?
I'm not sure on the number in Carrillo lot. I'll get those figures for you. In terms of the expenditures, the increase in salary and benefits is primarily due to the increase in cost for hourly employees. Supplies and services, just primarily that has to do with a little bit more money for water, electricity. Let me get to my cheat sheet. Was it? Oh, the credit card use. We are accepting credit cards. However, as Mr. Rouse knows, there is a fee that the credit card companies charge for the privilege of being able to accept a credit card. So we've seen that go up as well. And in the special projects area, this primarily is due to the increased use of the MyRide bus pass program by our city employees. And then the $100,000 one, we had budgeted in the current fiscal year $100,000 to do tenant improvements at the Railway Express building or the REA building down at the Depot lot Greyhound is in half of it. The other half is vacant. We were hoping to have had answer from the state on the lot by now. Since we haven't, we're just going to reappropriate the money for next fiscal year, and hopefully we have an answer. We only have put money in here for some tenant improvements if we were to find a tenant that wants assistance in terms of making some improvements in the building. And our hope is not to have to spend the money. So in the downtown parking program, we maintain and operate the city lots. We have surface lots and parking structures, five structures, 7 surface lots, 3,300 parking spaces. We're open 361 days out of the year, closed on Thanksgiving, Christmas Day, New Year's Day, and Easter Sunday. We mentioned we the two commuter lots as well as the Helena Street lot. The Helena Street lot is a 90-minute lot, and we also sell monthly parking passes for that lot. The parking staff does administer the Safe RV parking program. RVs are allowed to park in the evening if they have a pass with New Beginnings in both the Carrillo lot and the Coda commuter lot. And then we provide staff support to the downtown parking committee. And so some of the...
Excuse me, how many RVs we got parking there?
I believe we have available in the Coda lot for 5, if I'm correct, and 10 for the Carrillo lot. Some of the capital projects we're looking at for next fiscal year, again, REA building, if we get an answer from the state on that. Painting of parking structures, we're getting ready to paint parking structure 9, which is we call it the Libero Garage. It's behind the Libero Theater. It's going to be painted starting next week. We're looking at painting the inside and exterior of Lot 10, the Ortega Garage, across the street from Randy's Restaurant. The other thing that we're looking at doing, again, this is contingent upon receiving a favorable response from the state, is taking a look at that surface lot next to the Enterprise Fish Company. It's a surface lot. We call it the Fish Enterprise lot. It's currently in there 75-minute parking. We receive no revenue out of that lot, but we have to maintain the lot. So we're looking at, is there a way we can incorporate that into the depot lot, possibly by moving the gate arm out, or do something else so we can start generating revenue in the lot. There are some ADA improvements that we also need to make in the lot, but we want to do a wholesale look at the lot and just bring the lot up to a little bit of standard for a downtown parking program.
That would help in funk zone parking issues too, if they didn't have to worry about a 75-minute time frame. So,
yes, it would.
yeah, just across the street. So. Great. We do have some public comment speakers. I thought in this section you might, you're welcome to stay for water and facilities and all those other things, but do you have a question first? Go ahead.
Mr. Allen, the PBI, is there PBI established for below the freeway at any time now?
The PBA does go below the freeway, so the depot lot is in the PBA, so the Enterprise Company does pay in the PBIA. The Reagan Ranch Center, however, does not pay in the PBA.
Because of the nonprofit
status.
And then the proposed hotel, the Entrada, is that going to be excluded because of their own provided parking? Or?
Yeah, they would. I need to take a look at the Entrada and where they fall in. But if they were qualified to be in the PBA, they would get called a patron parking credit. So they would only pay 25%. Actually, they would be across the street and down the block, so they would not pay in the PBIA.
Okay, but you do have other things like the Indigo and the...
Indigo is required to pay in the PBIA. They are getting a patron parking credit because they have provided us proof that they have an off-site parking agreement to provide for most of the parking, so they're only paying 25%, and they're in a 100% zone of benefit.
And also, La Entrada is building, part of their development is they're building a parking structure that's available to the public. I think it's approximately 100 spaces, and then they're required to price it just like we price it, similar to what Santa Nueva is required to do.
And one more quick question for you. The dynamics of Lot 6, given that now the Victoria thing is becoming online now, has that changed, number one? And number two is, are we doing credit cards and the fee on entry for events at the Granada?
We are looking at doing credit cards per entry at the Granada. I'm not sure if we've gone that far yet. We need to get a handheld unit to do that.
It's called Square, one of those things.
It needs to be compatible with our system. But that's something that staff, I think the parking committee brought that up a couple of meetings ago. That's something that we are looking at doing. We have not seen a significant impact on the Grana Garage yet because of the Victoria Theater, primarily because most of the performers at night, what we're finding is they're at night and they're parking across the street in the Davis Center parking lot.
I even wonder if there's an app or something that could be devised where, you can, for upfront parking, and then you can just, swipe something. I don't know. There might be new technology there.
That is something that I have asked staff to take a look at. Is there some type of app that we can?
Actually, the Amtrak app is quite good. You can get your ticket ahead of time instead of going into if you're rushing to catch the train, you can just get it right on your phone, and they come around and they just scan it. And, so if people frequent visitors or whatever, they can have an account and deal with it that way. That it's pretty simple, but might be something to look into. Okay, I think the public commenters want to speak on this area here, so you're welcome to stay afterwards, of course. Matt Labrie, and then Sharon Byrne, and then Ethan Shankman. Good afternoon.
Madam Mayor, members of council, my name is Matt Labrie. I'm here on behalf of the Parking Committee this afternoon. And, typically I guess I'd be here to ask you to take proactive steps to protect parking funds from special projects. But this time I'd like to bring two ideas to you that we'd like to see your support on. And the first relates to other departments' budgets, and that has to do with the MyRide bus program, that when the general fund was particularly burdened, the downtown parking picked up and still does pick up the tab for the MyRide bus program. And I think the impact to other departments is about a total of $40,000 to shift that responsibility back to each department that takes advantage of the MyRide program. We'd love your support on that. It makes a significant contribution back to keeping the funds where they should be, which is in the parking reserve. The other thing that I wanted to bring to your attention was that the Downtown Parking Committee is well aware of the problems that have with vagrancy and the problems downtown, in particular as they relate to the connecting paseos between parking garages and our public sidewalks. And staff has done a tremendous job recently of hopping up and participating in that process to help solve the immediate problems. And the parking committee, and I think staff too, have seen that there's going to be a need for someone to take ownership of those connecting paseos, particularly as they connect the parking lots to that public sidewalk. And as we look at our long-range capital program and our maintenance funds, we would like to get the green light to really take ownership of that and participate in programs to help make that experience for our customers going from the parking garage out to the public sidewalk an excellent experience. So I'd just like to leave you with those two ideas and also throw the committee's weight and support behind what staff is presenting to you now as you're considering budgets.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You may want to come to the police and fire budget presentation, because I have a feeling everything related to beat coordinators and restorative policing and those issues you bring up about the paseos might come up. That might be a good conversation to.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Yeah, coordinate. Thank you. Great. Sharon Byrne.
I'm hoping, actually, that once we get the signs up on Milpas for street sweeping nights, since there's not a lot of overnight parking on Milpas now, if there's some enforcement that goes on there, that you'll see your parking citation revenue go up a lot, which would be great. I also want to say I'm hoping that I didn't hear this wrong, Mr. Armstrong, but I thought I heard you say you're committed to the encampments program. I don't know if I heard that right or not. I'll finish. All right. So if it is a program, that would be way better than where it is now, which is a one-off, really arduous, Herculean feat. through the Milpas Action Task Force, we identified a trouble area behind the post office. I don't know if you know this, but the post office in that area has closed at night now. You can no longer get access to your safe deposit boxes because too many people were sleeping in there and camping in the parking lot. There's a kind of a prostitution and drug ring operating in that area, and it's all connected to an encampment right off that on-ramp. It's been a thorny repeat problem. Caltrans and SPPD cleaned it out earlier this month, reported it at the Milpas Action Task Force in the early part of April, and it is reoccupied and has like a whole outdoor apartment complex set up going up. So I know that's demoralizing to your team. You know, when you go in there and you clean that out and it gets reoccupied. So if we can make that a systematic, defensible strategy, whether it's defensive planting, fencing, if there's some kind of infrastructure solution there, we would really like to get behind you and support that. But it has to be more than the one-offs that it is today with immediate reoccupancy, and it also has to be a little better than clean out than just immediate reoccupation. So thank you.
Thank you. Ethan Shankman?
Hi, I'm Ethan Shankman. I wanted to point out that the role of a municipal capacity only allows for unlimited parking at no charge for handicapped and disabled people. The PBIA and the parking franchise with the Enterprise Fund has been operating beyond a 10% margin of surplus. And I realize that there is a great deal of economic ambition to meet a variety of goals. But the number one goal is to make accommodation for elderly and disabled people. And that's what the function of this board, this panel, this subcommittee, is to quality assure. We've checked. There is no statutory exclusion that would provide for the city of Santa Barbara to bill or charge or collect against handicapped elderly people. And it would be somewhat similar to an analogy of the city of Santa Barbara entering into the hotel market. You decide to open up a city of Santa Barbara hotel, and you're just going into the private sector, or competing with the private sector, rather, and that's not appropriate. And that's what you're doing currently with the Enterprise Fund now, with all the parking structures, while you're posturing yourself as if you're a private enterprise when you're not. We're a government entity. We're a municipal enterprise. And the municipal enterprise function is not to compete against the private sector or the beneficiary, Medicare or the elderly or the disabled, but rather to provide additional assistance and support that the public wouldn't otherwise have to burden in the private sector. Okay. Are there any questions there, Ms. Kathy Murillo?
No, thank you very much.
Okay. All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Mr. Armstrong, did you want to elaborate on what Ms. Byrne was saying?
Just to be clear, we're committed to implementing a systematic encampment cleanup program.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Allen? Or comments on this part? Great, thank you. Okay, next. How are we doing? Do you want a break? Want to get a quick break, about 10-minute break or so? Okay. And we're on to the fleet funds. Thank you. Whenever you're ready.
There we go.
Yep.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of council. I'm Gary Horwald, the fleet manager for the city, and I'm here to talk about the fleet management 2015 budget. And there's two programs in fleet management, fleet maintenance and operations, and the fleet replacement component. Not many changes from what was planned for 2015. There was an addition of a fire truck. You can see the increase in fleet maintenance there for that. And there was the elimination of a street sweeper, which accounts for the decrease in the fleet replacement there. On the expenditure side,
where are you seeing the fire truck?
In the fleet maintenance of $24,000 from what was planned.
Huh?
There's an the fire
And
department.
that's not buying, that's buying a, yeah, a tire.
What you're looking at, these are the revenues that flow into fleet maintenance. And so this is the annual cost of the maintenance of one fire truck.
Maintenance of one project. Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that if that's not clear, but so, and then the reduction in the fleet replacement side was the sweeper. On the expenditure side of things, there was some increase in supplies and services, mostly due to increase in parts and contractual services. The big item is in special projects. We have a capital project that was allocated to special projects, and we're moving it into the capital line item where it appropriately belongs. And the also reflected in the capital line item is increases for vehicle replacement, mostly due to increase in cost of fire apparatus and the increase in cost of new police cars, which I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment, and a couple pieces of miscellaneous equipment in a pool vehicle. There's 15 full-time employees in fleet management, which remains unchanged from the previous year. And fleet has 483 vehicles and equipment that are part of the fleet with a replacement value in excess of $36 million. And our goal is to safely maintain reliable vehicles and equipment, make them available, and preserve the capital value. Some of our P3 highlights: we need to comply with all federal and state emission mandates. We expect to do about 1,170 preventive maintenance services this year. And when purchasing vehicles, we're going to maximize our purchasing of fuel-efficient or alternative fuel vehicles. Sorry about that. I'm one of the culprits that's reducing that gas tax revenue. And we're planning to revise a plan to replace the diesel fuel tank, which I'll talk about a little bit more in the presentation as well. So a big part of what we do is the maintenance and repair of the city's fleet. The city's fleet is made up of a large variety of vehicles and equipment, from sedans to police cars to fire apparatus to large trucks, forklifts, stump grinders, all kinds of stuff. And we do it with in-house staff and use contractual support to help us perform those repairs. We also maintain a pool vehicle program. You guys have heard me talk about this before, but for the benefit of those who haven't, the pool vehicle program, the purpose of that is to facilitate the sharing of vehicles and equipment so that one vehicle can be used by multiple users, thereby reducing the number of vehicles and equipment that we need. And on the left is the administrative vehicles. I call it a two-tier program. That's been in place for a number of years. And on the right is our truck and equipment pool, which has been in place for about a year. And we do about 18,000 transactions a year and over 250,000 miles. And through the process, we've eliminated, we're still at 14 vehicles that we've reduced the fleet by. We haven't had to repurchase those, and 2 large trucks. We intend to further leverage the equipment pool by utilizing what's known as hook lift trucks. Hook lift trucks are trucks that can accommodate multiple bodies on them. So the advantage there is you can purchase one truck and use multiple bodies for multiple purposes, again, thereby reducing the number of trucks that you need to purchase and also better utilize the trucks that you have. One of the projects that's currently going on is the renewal of the fleet facility offices. And there's 3 primary drivers that made this necessary. The first is safety. As you can see from this picture, when city employees come to drop off a vehicle or pick up a vehicle, they've got to walk through a working service bay in order to get to the fleet offices and talk with staff. And our desire was to create a customer reception area outside of the work area. Also, the fleet management the fleet management facility doesn't have women's restrooms. We've got 2 females on staff, and that was addressed along with ADA and accessibility issues as part of the project. And the last is, we're simply, there's simply not enough room. You've got too many people working in too cramped of quarters, and that was addressed as well. In 2014, I had talked about building a new refueling facility down at the city annex yard across from El Estero. And we encountered some zoning restrictions and requirements that were pushing the cost too high. So we're re-looking at that right now, reviewing the options, and I expect to come back to the council later this year with a revised proposal on that. Fleet is responsible to plan for the replacement of the city's fleet.
Sorry, Mr.
Thank
White,
you, Madam
go
Mayor. Where do we see I assume there's going to be then an expansion or a remodel. I mean, you had a little set of plans there for your new facility. Are we going to see more on that later on what that remodel or expansion is about, or can you describe a little bit what that is?
Sure. I can describe that. I don't have more in this presentation, but I can certainly talk about it.
Okay.
What we're doing is, as I said, we're creating a customer reception area so that people have a place to come in and communicate with the people that are receiving the vehicles and talk about their vehicle needs. And also, hopefully, a place where they can, for short visits, they can wait while the oil's being changed or something like that. The office staff will be consolidated in that area as well. And there's the restrooms that are being built to accommodate the female staff as well. There's also part of that area right now. What we're doing is we're taking existing storage space and we're converting it into the office space. And on the right-hand side in the plans there, you can see that's where we have a small parts warehouse. Warehouse, I don't know is the right word, but small parts area to keep parts on hand that are needed to support the fleet. And so that's part of this as well. Does that answer your questions?
You say too many people are working in too little space, and so that would assume that would mean that you'd be expanding the space. And it's sounding like you're making the space more efficient and perhaps outboarding the storage or outboarding anyway.
Yeah, we're making a shift.
Interior remodel or something like that anyway.
Yeah, this is being built inside of existing storage space, and what we're doing is we're moving staff to this area. We're going to use the existing offices for storage space, for some of the storage space that we don't need it quite as large an area for that. So it'll give them a little bit more appropriate room to be able to work. It'll provide for staff working in vicinity of each other so there's backup support for each other. That was part of the design process, where right now they're separated in separate quarters, but not large enough. You've got a supervisor doesn't have an office to work in. He's got people coming in and out as well as other workers as well. So trying to make that a little bit more appropriate, where if he needs to have a private conversation or meet with an employee, he's got space to do so. Those are just some of the issues that were addressed.
But the bottom line is it's basically within the existing footprint that they have there, and they're basically using the existing space and remodeling it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so I was talking about how we're responsible to plan for the replacement of the city's fleet and to manage a revolving replacement fund to ensure that that we're able to replace the fleet vehicles when they're needed. And you can see from 2006 to what's proposed for 2015, there's quite a bit of variance between the years, with a sharp increase in both 2014 and 15. And that's primarily due to, in the earlier years, trying to extend the life cycles where we can and defer replacement, and now we're having to replace some of those vehicles that we've been deferring. The good news is that the replacement fund is adequately funded, and there's sufficient funds in the reserves to be able to meet our current and planned vehicle replacement needs.
Is that the new normal number then, from going forward, sort of that order of magnitude?
No, I think that you'll continue to see it really vary from year to year, just depending on the life cycle. You got a variance of life cycle from a large variety of equipment, and each year we review that. We have an expected life cycle, but we look at it and say, can we get another year out of this? Do we need to replace it now? And so it just really varies from year to year, and the revolving reserve fund works really well for that, so that the ebbs and flows of what's needed can be accommodated.
And I think the really good news story here is back 11, 12 years ago, we had no equipment replacement fund, and we would basically budget every year, and fire trucks would compete with police officers, because we didn't have a systematic replacement program. And so over the last 11, 12 years, we've created this fund, we've funded it. During the recession, we had some dry times, but now, when we first did it, we didn't put a lot of seed money in, so we had all this unfunded liability we had to deal with, which meant we had to kind of delay the replacement to try and build up some reserves. Okay. And now we are pretty much at status, so that we look at our future liabilities and we look at the revenues coming in, and we now have a fund that's pretty much fully funded.
Mr. White?
No, I mean, that's where it would seem to me that you would need 20 years to kind of get your cycle, get it so that it's stabilized, in that particularly with fire engines and some of the bigger stuff that they come in and take $1 million or whatever that bigger number is as we go along. But you're saying you've actually augmented it enough that you feel it's stabilized in half that time. Remarkable.
For the last 20 years, the Ford Crown Victoria shown in the lower left was the standard for the police patrol vehicle. And if you'll remember from a previous budget session, we purchased a number of those vehicles. Ford stopped making them. We purchased a number of them in advance, allowing us time to review and plan for the transition to the new patrol vehicles that were available. And so a team of fleet and police staff did that, reviewed the options, and have settled on the Chevrolet Caprice, which you can see in the upper right. And that will be the new patrol vehicle as the old ones are replaced that we'll upgrade to going forward. And then as...
quick question. What is the cost of a new police vehicle now?
Cost of a new police vehicle... Initially, the costs are going to be a little bit increased, and they're about $42,000 because with the Crown Victorias, we would reuse the equipment over and over as we transferred from old police vehicles to the new ones. We would just take the equipment out of the old and put it in the new. Now that they don't make it any longer, we're going to have to replace some of that equipment. But after we go through the first cycle, we'll start to be able to reuse that as well.
And that, in addition, requires the computers and stuff in there. 42 for the basic vehicle is what you're saying?
Yeah, well, 42,000 includes the light bars, the prisoner cage, the prisoner seat, a lot of the equipment that supported the IT equipment, the camera, the computer. That is funded separately through police IT.
Right. Yes, those are extras.
Those
right.
are extra. Yeah.
I didn't see those the last time I went to get a car, so.
Yeah. Okay, in alignment with City Council policy to purchase fuel-efficient or alternative fuel technology vehicles, we try to do that whenever we can. That happens slowly over time as the vehicles reach their end of their life cycle and they're replaced. Currently, we have 10 all-electric vehicles in the fleet, and we've got about 43 electric hybrid vehicles. And pictured in the upper right is an example of a project we're currently working on. I'm pretty excited about, and that's a truck that has a large diesel engine with an aerial lift on it. It's typically used to do tree trimming or repair traffic signals or street lights. And normally what happens is a truck like that goes to the site that they're going to work at parks, and that large diesel engine continues to run to power the aerial lift. And so the advanced technology that's available now allows us to shut off the truck engine and to power the lift electrically with an electric hydraulic component. So that reducing the amount of fuel consumed and reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
And I think people that live in the neighborhood
We'll appreciate that.
really appreciate that, not only for the smell and stuff, but the noise is significantly different.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Right.
Thank you.
Any questions? Go ahead.
Thank you. So I would hope that we wouldn't use contract workers in car repair, especially if it's just routine. I mean, if there's kind of an emergency or some service that our regular employees don't do, I guess it would be okay. I mean, I would like to express that. And then now that you have ladies' bathrooms, there seems to be a gender imbalance in your department. Maybe we could look at hiring more women. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Facilities, Mr. Dewey.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, council members. I'm Jim Dewey, the Facilities and Energy Manager, and I'll be talking about the facilities funds. So the facility fund has 6 programs, and they are building maintenance, energy conservation, environmental compliance, communications, custodial services, and facilities capital. We have 37 full-time employees, and we have a fiscal year 15 budget of around $9 million. So looking at our revenues, the adjustment that I want to point out, the significant adjustment here is the additional $500,000 in our capital program this year. This was a one-time general fund, extra funding. It was put into the capital program. We have a very robust capital program this year, so it was helping to fund that. So I'll be talking a little bit more about that program. This is our budget pie, so total of around $9 million. Roughly a third of that is going to our capital program this year, around $3 million. Around a third goes to building maintenance, which is the maintenance and service that occurs in our buildings. And then the rest of the third is divided between custodial services, electronic maintenance, energy conservation, and environmental compliance. Looking at some of our proposed changes from our planned budget in 2015 on the spending side, we had a little bit of a change that Pat Kelly mentioned. The traffic signal maintenance group has shifted to engineering from facilities. When we made that change, there were some administrative costs that needed to come out of that program and back into facilities. So that's what the $35,000 was in additional in salaries and benefits. In supplies and services, we had an increase of $100,000. That was due to a custodial contract services agreement. We had an agreement with an existing low bidder, and he wasn't able to complete the work properly, and so we had to relieve that company of that business and brought in the next lowest bidder, which was an additional $100,000, which is really around what we expected to pay anyway, but we needed to add that back into our budget. In special projects, we have an additional $135,000. When we split off the facilities capital fund from facilities in fiscal year 14, we had routine maintenance coupled with facilities renewal, and we neglected to bring routine maintenance back into our budget. That includes things like the air conditioning maintenance that occurs. And so it was an adjustment to adjust for that error. And in capital, we have an additional $1.6 million to help support our capital program for this year. $500,000 of that was funded through one-time funding this year, and the rest is coming from reserves. So these are our facilities programs in a nutshell. We manage the facilities maintenance and operation in city buildings and provide for their renewal. We manage the environmental compliance in the public right-of-way. We manage the renewable energy generation and all the energy efficiency programs in the city. We maintain and operate all the communication and electronic systems for the city, and we maintain the city streetlights. Looking at our building maintenance section, building maintenance provides for all of the renewal of our buildings and responds to all the service calls that happen in general fund buildings. We also operate somewhat like a general contractor. We provide services for a fee. So if departments have special projects where they want to do a remodel or if they need welding and fabricating services, we provide those on a chargeback basis. We also maintain over 2,500 city streetlights. So the facilities program, we maintain over 300 general fund buildings, both large and small, and all of them are very well used. And one thing I just want to point out here is that, even in our small buildings, we have significant cost. This is a picture of one of the restrooms in one of our parklands, and it has a Spanish tile roof. I mean, just replacing and maintaining a roof like that is really quite expensive. And so we have a lot of expenses tied up with capital renewal, both in large and small buildings.
Do your expenses here also cover the daily maintenance or hourly maintenance in the case of a bathroom like this?
Yes, as far as custodial services.
Yeah, keeping it clean and.
Yes.
Yeah.
Our custodians clean 30 of our largest general fund buildings. Our communications services department maintains all the city's telephone systems, radio systems, and we're also installing camera and security systems too and maintaining those. Our energy management section provides for all the renewable energy programs, and we're currently saving $465,000 annually in the purchase utilities budget from energy conservation and restructuring of electricity rates. And our environmental compliance section provides for all of the hazardous materials cleanup and vector control in the public right-of-way. So our capital program, as I said before, in fiscal year 14, we were able to split out the capital program into its own fund. And one of the advantages of doing that is that within the budget, we show all of our large capital projects. And so we're able to communicate better on a year-to-year basis and also long-term about the kind of investment that we're making in our buildings. So that helps to inform the public and staff so they can better coordinate with their capital improvement programs. Currently, capital maintenance has a backlog of about $218 million in general fund buildings. Typically, a building has a life of around 50 years before you need a major capital renewal. 60% of our gross square footage is over 60 years old, so we have quite a need for major capital renewal. And what happens when major capital renewal comes up is that it triggers things like code upgrades like ADA compliance, seismic upgrades, fire compliance, and so there's a lot of costs associated with these. In the past, we've had the redevelopment agency funding, and we've been able to do major renewal at Fire Station 1 and the Creo Recreation Center. They both turned out they were amazing projects, but there's still a lot more to do in that area. This is a list of our capital projects that we're planning for fiscal year 15. And in these projects, we're replacing a lot of equipment and building systems that are quite old and that need to be replaced. So some of those pictures up there are pictures of some of the mechanical systems that really should have been replaced a while ago. They're not running very efficiently, and when we're done with those, they'll run better and save energy. As I mentioned before, this year we have a very robust capital funding program of $3 million. We have one-time general funding of $500,000 I've already mentioned, and we'll be using reserves of about $1.7 million, which is above the reserve policy. But this was something that we planned in order to fully facilitate our capital program for this year. And one of the major project that we're going to be doing next year is the renovation of the heating, ventilating, and air conditioning systems at the police station. This project alone has a $2 million budget, and it'll be replacing all of the old equipment that really is original equipment. So this is 50 years old, and it's not running very effectively. It's not running very efficiently, and we just all agreed that the best thing to do is to get in there and replace all of this equipment in one shot and get it done. And we will be seeing substantial energy savings and operation savings from this, as well as better climate control. So the city has a lot of really wonderful facilities, and in the past, the community has really supported building them and enjoys their benefit today. But whenever a building is built, it doesn't come with any sort of a funding mechanism where we can do major capital renewal. And so we're looking for those opportunities now, looking for funding for major capital renewal in our capital program. But good news is that right now we're in planning to renovate the Cabrillo Pavilion and Arts Center, and which is one of our prized assets. We're really happy to see that. Facilities is always looking for ways to innovatively fund capital projects. We've been using a mechanism called on-bill financing to do that quite a bit. And we're able to fund energy conservation projects and pay back the capital cost on the electricity bills from energy savings produced by the project. And this is all at 0% financing. In this particular project, we replaced 24 lights at the Los Baños Del Mar pool, and these were incandescent lights using 500 watts apiece, with LED lights that use 70 watts. And once we pay off the on-bill financing, we'll be saving $2,300 a year on that.
When do we pay that off? How long does it take to pay that off?
I don't remember the exact,
5 years
but it's like 3 years. What they do is that in the financing, they figure out, what your saving is going to be, and then they figure out the term, and then shrink the term down to whatever the savings is. So you pay that off, with the savings.
Are there a lot more opportunities like that? That's such a dramatic example. I can't think of other facilities.
Before you answered, the Sustainability Committee had its annual energy and facilities report, and we suggested it comes to the full council because all told, I think we're saving now $460,000 a year citywide on bills that was going to Southern California Edison for electricity alone, just because of upgrades. That's just one example, but it's a great presentation, so kudos to you for that.
Great, thank you. So more to follow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, we haven't seen Mr. Hagmark in a little while, so we'll have him come up now. You wanted this, right? This new position, and careful what you wish for.
Yeah, exactly right. Good evening, Madam Mayor, council members. I'm going to start off by, before I get into my presentation, just wanted to say what a pleasure it has been stepping into this acting role and expanding my horizons, for sure. And I think working with some amazing, dedicated professional staff in water resources, it's just such a pleasure to lead this group right now. And, there's 150 men and women that work in water resources. It constitutes over half of the public works budget, and doing a lot of great things in the community right now. So I'm going to start off with our wastewater group, and within our wastewater group, there's three sections: the laboratory group, the wastewater collection section, and wastewater treatment. So revenues this year, I'll just start off by prefacing, we aren't anticipating any impacts from the drought on the wastewater rates. And so the rates that were put together and brought before you guys, there is no changes anticipated with those. This last year, we underwent a comprehensive rate analysis and looked at all of the upcoming capital projects that we had at El Estero and came to the conclusion that we needed to raise rates this year by 5.5%. Because there's a lot here, I'm just going to highlight. If you have any questions, though, please stop me. Service charges this year, you're seeing that $243,000 adjustment and increase. When we had originally planned, we had assumed possibly a 4% increase, and so that $240,000 represents the difference between a 4 and a 5.5% increase in revenues. And the other line item I wanted to highlight was the intergovernmental. What is that? This line item represents the expected SRF loan revenue for FY15. State Revolving Fund Loan, SRF. I apologize for that. And that funding would be for the secondary treatment improvement project. That was where that money was coming from. And basically, this is an administrative kind of an adjustment here. Instead of showing that full revenue coming in, it reflects the actual revenue we expect to bring in from that loan this year based on expenses. And we'll see that on the next slide as we get into expenses. So just quickly going down through expenses for the revenue of a wastewater fund. Supplies and services, main difference in that line item is a result of doing some fats, oils, and grease program. We're bringing in a consultant to help us out with that program and developing some controls for that program going forward. And under special projects, there's that $455,000 increase. Basically, that's the result of two major efforts. One is $250,000 for the computerized maintenance and management system, also called CMMS. This is an effort that has been on hold for several years in anticipation of the upgrades to FMS. Now that that's in place, the current CMMS software has actually been in use since the late 90s. We've been using that software, and they're no longer providing any more support to that. So we need to get going. And then the other program is $200,000 roughly for the supervisory control and data acquisition, also called SCADA. They're basically doing some hardware and software updates. This is also driven by the lack of vendor support. There's no longer software and equipment we've been using since the 90s as well, and needed to move on. They're no longer supporting that. And then the capital. The capital, as I mentioned on the last slide, that's basically a reflection of the SRF loan impacts. Basically, we're just showing there the expenditures we anticipate in this fiscal year. Overall, it shows that there's a 19% change, and that, just to kind of clarify what that is, because there isn't a 19% change. If you remove the capital line item, which, as I mentioned, is just an administrative, the actual change to the proposed changes is approximately $600,000 increase this year in the wastewater fund. And
Mr. Hart has a question.
Just so I'm sure I understand this. So what you originally thought you were going to be able to do all this work in 1 year, or you accounted for it in 1 year, now you're spreading it over 2 fiscal years. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, when we originally went into this, the thought was that we just put it all in there. That's was just shown we wouldn't actually spend it all that, but all that money would go in there. And finance recommended we break it out and be a better way to display it all.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So So wastewater capital, as you saw, we have roughly $8 million in capital program for FY15. I'm planning to discuss those projects as they relate to the various programs, so I'm just going to kind of put that in here. So the wastewater collection group, there's approximately 17 staff allocated to this program. There are no major changes planned for this program or the budget. The core function of this group remains to be the safe and effective operation of the city's 257 miles of sewer mains. Our sanitary sewer overflow target this calendar year, as noted in the P3 goals, is to have no more than 8 events. The consent decree, I believe, calls for 12 this year, so we're shooting to be way below the consent decree. We have had 3 small SSO events this calendar year, and all have been contained and captured and no impacts to the natural systems. Staff will be making a presentation actually on May 13th of the results of last year's collection system performance. I think the council will be pleased with the performance of the collection staff in keeping our system performing and our community safe. Capital projects related to the collection system continue to be the sewer main rehab program that's ongoing. The CCTV program, which we're constantly bringing in new data, assessing and prioritizing what mains need to be cleaned more, which mains need to be rehabbed, and then kind of basically laying out a program. And so our goal has been, again, to CCTV the entire city in 10 years. With financial constraints, we're thinking it might drag out a little more than 10 years, but we're going to see if we can't keep that on track. But we're finding that there's quite a bit of work out there to do, and so diverting some of that CCTV money to actually doing some work as well. The El Estero wastewater treatment plant, lots of stuff going on here this year. There's 27 staff allocated to this program. No major changes in the program or budget. The core function of this group is to see that all communities' wastewater is treated and disposed of in a manner consistent with state and federal regulations. As you all may be aware, there have been some significant improvements over the last few years at the 35-year-old plant, and there's still much work to be done. The staff at the plant are dedicated, intelligent, and creative, and a pleasure to work with. Many times, the large projects require the staff to come up with ingenious workarounds to keep the plant operating while key components are replaced or rebuilt. The headwork screening facility and the influent pump station, pictured above, you'll see Thomas Welsh in the right-hand corner over here. We had some students come through, and this is actually in the lower galleries of our influent pumps. Thomas is, just to highlight Thomas, he's a great staff person. He really enjoys his job, and it comes through. And he's also he also teaches a water treatment class at the Santa Barbara City College. The FY15, the facility will be undergoing the replacement of the tertiary project. It was approved by council yesterday. Despite being managed by El Estero staff, this project is actually paid for by water. So I'll be talking about it a little bit more in that water fund section. FY15, our major capital goals are to begin final design of the secondary treatment improvement project. Pictured on the left there is one of our aeration basins in the secondaries. That's estimated to be about a $20 million project, fairly significant. And then we're also going to begin the biosolids process planning. Eventually, that'll turn into a biosolids project, which could be upwards of $15 million at this point. These major capital projects are all included in the city's wastewater financial plan and FY15 wastewater proposed rate increases. In addition, we're also going to be doing some cleaning of our anaerobic digesters. As you can imagine, this is one of the more challenged locations of the plant. And we try to do that every 5 to 7 years, and we're at that 7 years. And the cost of that is pretty significant. I believe it's about $750,000 to take those down, and staff really has to manage that whole operation. We do bring on a consultant, our contractor, to help, but it's a big effort for staff. Okay. So as part of the scope of the treatment staff, they also are responsible for the city's 9 wastewater lift stations. 7 of them are actually city-owned. 2 of them are county-owned up in Mission Canyon. The focus for this upcoming year is La Colina lift station force main and adding a redundant force main. So we're going after making sure our lift stations are up and running, and we aren't going to see any issues with
When you
that.
say lift station, is that for pumping overnight to fill up something so that we have water the next day?
No, but we keep them separate. Pump station is for water. Lift station is for moving sewage.
Okay.
And so there usually are small tanks at each one of these facilities. And when they get up to a certain point, the pump kicks on and pumps it up to basically maybe a gravity flow.
Gravity
from there.
flow. Okay, thank you.
So these are to drain like lower parts of the city where sewage drains to.
A good example, if you think right by Arroyo Burro Beach, we have a lift station because in order to get the sewage up to El Estero, we have to pump it up the hill, up Cliff Drive, so it can then flow down. And so that's what a lift station does, is it because our geography isn't all up, going straight down, you need these lift stations.
And finally, there's the laboratory staff. There are 7 staff allocated to this program, and there are no major changes in this program or budget. The core function of this group is to provide high-quality water and wastewater sampling and analysis. Laboratory staff perform technical work for both wastewater and water permit and regulatory needs. Laboratory staff perform city industrial waste program management functions, and laboratory staff provide ad hoc technical support to other city departments, including creeks and waterfront. As stated previously, the FY15 budget proposes a 5.5% increase. This chart summarizes what those impacts to our ratepayers will do in comparison to other South Coast agencies. The average user will see less than a $3 increase per month in their rates for FY15. And as you can see from the comparison that was done of our neighbor agencies, the city has a very competitive wastewater rates. So if there's any questions on wastewater, otherwise I'm going to jump into the water. Okay. Within the water fund, there are 5 sections. We have water treatment, water distribution, Gibraltar Dam operations, water supply management, and meter reading. So based on the proposed water conservation rates, the following table of revenues reflects the anticipated increases predicted by the rate model with a 20% drop in water usage. Of significance on here is the meter sales. With a desired decrease in usage, the intent of the new rates are to stabilize revenues. As you will see in the next slide, of expenditures for this year are anticipated to be roughly $46 million, while revenues are anticipated to be $39 million. The difference is being made up with water fund reserves. Based on the projections, the water fund reserves are anticipated to end in FY15 with $2.6 million below council policy, as was discussed when we presented and proposed the rates in mid-April. So going through the expenditures, and again, I'm just going to kind of highlight some of the significant ones. As you can imagine, this has been a particularly difficult year, and FY15 promises to be more of the same. Over the last few months, staff has had to sit down and completely reshape the FY15 budget and reflect the impacts of drought. Under the special projects, the big change here is the result of funding for COME to cover costs anticipated with the emergency pumping project, the Central Coast Water Authority to cover costs of purchasing and delivery of supplemental water supplies, and additional funding for the conservation group to fund expanded advertising and rebates. Under equipment and other, increase for the purchase of a vehicle for the water supply group. The water supply conservation group has been borrowing a vehicle from community development, and they need the vehicle back for FY15. So as a result, we need to purchase an additional vehicle for use by staff, particularly who do water checkups. That's why they can't use the pool vehicles. They kind of need a dedicated vehicle so they can have all their supplies in that. Under debt services, this is a good news story here. The refinancing of water debt is anticipated to have an annual savings to the fund of approximately $115,000 per year for the next 13 years, for a total savings of $1.5 million. So basically the $1 million there is an administrative kind of balancing act, but that's the end game is a savings of $1.5 million to refinance that debt. Capital, the big change in this line items are driven by the drought. Further along in the presentation, I will go into more detail about the drought-related projects. and what was done to minimize the cost impacts from the proposed projects and to limit the proposed adjustments. At this time, I'd like to make council aware of a proposed change to FY15 capital budget. We had anticipated for the tertiary project, which is paid for out of the water fund, that funding for that would, in FY15, would kind of balance the cost of the tertiary project. We had to go dip into reserves. And yesterday, funds were appropriated. $3.116 million was appropriated from reserves. So what that means is for FY15, instead of having $8.78 million, it'll be closer to $5.6 million. And so we'll be making that change to the budget. Water capital. As you know, I've been reporting monthly on the status of the drought response capital, so I'll just quickly summarize since below there are some major elements. The recycled water system, we're moving forward with Valverde well, which is to help offset potable water demands. That's a well we have that doesn't currently have potable water, but could be used for the recycled water system. The high school well currently has difficult water, but we could be used in the short run to offset in the recycled water system. Groundwater projects, we'll be moving forward with the Alameda well replacement. You'll be seeing that soon. Looking forward to awarding the design for that. Gibraltar silt wells, this is a picture actually of Gibraltar, a current picture of Gibraltar. As soon as it does go dry, we'll be looking at drilling some wells in the bottom of it to hopefully extract some additional water from the silts and gravels below the reservoir. And then the desalination facility be coming to council next Tuesday to discuss moving forward with a pre-designed contract for that. To minimize the impact to ratepayers as a result of the drought-related projects, a combination of reserves and the deferment of planned capital was used. By deferment of planned capital, the increases to the capital budget was limited to less than 20% planned. The planned projects that have been deferred include the annual water main replacement project, which is typically about $3 million. We are putting off some reservoir improvement projects and some pump station improvements to kind of free up the money to go after some of these drought projects. Now getting into the other sections, we have the Water Resources Management Group, which is 2.5 staff allocated to that. That basically includes the water system manager and myself and an administrative person. The city's Water Resources Management Program covers a broad spectrum depicted on this picture. And I know it's kind of difficult to see here, but our water resources management starts from the state water coming into Kachuma, being delivered through Tecolote Tunnel to the south coast, conveyed along the south coast conduit into Laurel Reservoir, where it is pulled out and treated at the Cater Water Treatment Plant. As has been mentioned before, we treat water for Montecito, Summerlin, and Carpinteria, so there's a portion of that water that goes downstream. We also have resources in Gibraltar. The city owns Gibraltar and delivers water through Mission Tunnel, and the city has approximately now 9 groundwater wells that we will be relying on heavily over the next few months. Hopefully it's not years. And then we also have a desal facility. There are 2 staff allocated to the Gibraltar Reservoir program. We have Frank and Lalo who are up there maintaining the facility. There's actually a lot to maintain up there, even when the reservoir is low like this. There's actually a lot of work that can be done that you usually can't do when the reservoir is full, so we're looking forward to it. And just as a funny, we have some of our water staff, and if you can tell who's the engineer, and I can say this because I'm an engineer, we have our engineer here who's been up there, and he helps out in the inspection of the Mission Tunnel. There are no major changes to this program, and staff will be making sure that we can take advantage of the low reservoir to get some maintenance done while it's low. Cater Water Treatment Plant, there are 15 staff allocated to this program. There are no major changes to this program or budget. However, as a result of the drought, capital projects at Cater have been reduced to the minimum, which will include replacement of critical plant valve actuators. Groundwater production and treatment. This is actually kind of a shared role of the treatment staff. They're involved in this as well. The treatment staff coordinate and oversee the operation of the city's 9 wells. In coordination with our water supply group, we will be aggressively monitoring the basins and yields as the drought goes on to track basin performance and predict production. The major elements of work related to wells is all coming through the drought capital projects. The treatment staff, in coordination with distribution staff, will play a critical role in giving input on drought-related capital projects as they develop. This is a very busy slide, and I kind of did that on purpose because this is a very busy group. The water distribution group is made up of 35 staff, and we'll start up here in the upper left-hand corner. There's part of our typical main replacement and repairs. We have in the middle one of our many 12 pump stations. On the right, we have main breaks that our staff respond to. We have reservoirs that are constantly being maintained. And then we have, this happens to be piping coming out of Victrace, which services the downtown area. It's pretty significant piping here. So this is a very busy core group here. They assist in many ways throughout the city, taking care of over 300 miles of water main, which includes responses to emergency breaks. There's 24,000 service connections, 13 reservoirs, 12 pump stations, 9 wells, and 17 pressure zones. The major program changes for FY15 are drought-driven changes, which include deferment of the annual main replacement program. We're actually deferring reservoir cleaning this year. The state requires that you clean your reservoirs every 5 years. We typically clean them every year just to keep the water quality up and guarantee that. We are going to not be cleaning the reservoirs this year, and we'll monitor to see if that has any adverse impacts. We don't anticipate that having anything, but we'll also be reducing our annual flushing program. And we're doing both of those to kind of conserve water. There is going to be some lines that we do need to flush to make sure we keep the water fresh, but we'll be doing these to basically head off waste of any additional water. Well, the distribution staff will be heavily involved in acceleration of the well maintenance, rehab, and replacement. They are working heavily on getting going with phase 2 of the asset management program, which will look at our water mains and putting together a program for main replacements. I'm hoping in the coming years to get ahead of some of these main breaks. This year, I think we had approximately 40 main breaks. It varies between 40 and 60, but we're trying to get those main breaks down. But it's a good discussion of, at this point, I would say we're stretching, we're getting the maximum life out of our pipes, and with that comes dealing with the main breaks. And so kind of that fine balance, financial balancing of life expectancy. Another huge effort for the group this year is the main meter replacement program. The program goal is to replace 23,000 5/8 meters, the typical residential meter, over the next 5 years. Our P3 goal for this year is to try and get 4,600 of those meters done. Staff has spent almost a year researching and testing meters to try and land on a good fit for our community, and ultimately landed on a mechanical positive displacement meter, which we felt guarantees us the best accuracy. It doesn't overread and has a long history of use. The new meters, we have them coming wired for advanced metering infrastructure if we choose to go that way. It was a small additional cost to have that, and it kind of puts us one step ahead on that if we go that direction. Meter replacements are being done by 3 teams of 2. Each group has 1 permanent distribution staff member and 1 hourly. So we're kind of leveraging our resources to try and get that done internally rather than contracting that work out. Staff is working with a consultant as well on the advanced metering infrastructure business analysis, and this work effort should be completed by midsummer.
So those meters can be read remotely, the new ones?
No, not currently. These are just basic meters, but they are wired so that if we go down the route of advanced metering, it basically you'll be plugging in the brain that would read that mechanical meter.
Thank you.
Sorry. Meter reading. There are 6 staff allocated to this program, 1 supervisor and 5 field staff. No major changes to this program or budget in FY15. The core function of this group is to provide timely and accurate meter reading, and staff reads approximately 24,000 meters every month. A recycled water system. There are 5 staff allocated to this program. That group kind of is nested within the distribution group, but there are no major changes to this program or budget. Core functions include the maintenance and operation of our recycled water system. With the recycled water treatment plant going offline this summer, staff will be very active this year in assisting with operating the system in a unique manner to accommodate the use of additional potable wells, non-potable wells. Staff will also be working with engineering to explore new ways to operate the system more efficiently. Historically, demands of the system have been driven by Elings Park, which is located geographically at the highest point in our recycled water system, and staff is looking at ways to better meet their needs and reduce overall pumping costs for electricity.
Hart has a question.
Does the recycled water system have feedback in terms of like if there's a break in the line or anything like that?
It's just the same way that our potable water system does. People call it in.
Okay.
Yeah. Complaints. So the Water Conservation Group, there's 6 staff allocated to this program. There are no major changes to the program or budget. The biggest impacts have been the sheer volume of extra work due to the drought. Conservation-based rates, updated water conservation regulations, supplemental water purchase, involvement in Lake Kachuma-related issues have dominated the agenda and are forecasted to do so at least into the next winter. Water Conservation expanding their program, increasing public outreach in water conservation measures, and responding in a timely manner to requests for water checkups. Let's see. And as I mentioned, this is the program that we'll be getting at, possibly an additional vehicle. So to kind of end on the rates, this slide reflects the proposed rate increases to encourage greater conservation while still maintaining revenues in close balance to expenditures. You'll notice that the average user in our system uses actually about 12 HCF. And so they'll be seeing approximately a $10.65 increase. And this last slide here is a summary of a rate comparison of the South Coast agencies. This is actually pretty fresh data. The rates above reflect those in effect in January of 2014, as reported by the Santa Barbara County Water Agency. The comparison is based on a standard residential 5/8 meter with the typical monthly usage of 12 HCF. Despite the proposed rate changes to encourage conservation, the impacts to our average user are still the lowest of the 4 main water agencies on the South Coast.
So these other rates and the other agencies might go up in July, I would think.
I would anticipate. I mean, Montecito's over the next 5 years will be raising their rates 50%, is 55%?
50?
Yeah.
Wow.
They're really jacking up their rates, and then they have they've got a big penalty clause in there if you use over 25 HCF. So I don't have an idea what their average user is going to be paying, but that's pretty significant. And all the other agencies, I'm not exactly sure where they are with their rate. Everyone's kind of in a little different situation, but I would anticipate they will also be having some rate increases for this next year.
So we keep talking with desal, and if we were to bring it online and the cost, and I know there's costing mechanisms, so you'd stretch out the capital cost, but if we were to rely on desal, what do you think that our rates would, have you figured that out, like what the rates might look like?
You know, I think at this point it's kind of premature. I think we should have some really good information on this by September. That's our plan with the pre-design work. Have some really good ideas of costs, and we'll take those costs and feed those back with the help of our rate model that we have. Feed those costs back in here, and actually, I think that's a good goal, is to report back what those impacts could look like, and that depends on how we operate. If we operate it just for the drought and we spread those costs out, or if it becomes some type of ongoing small percentage of our entire water supply.
Any other questions or comments? That was your last slide. Oh, Mr. Armstrong?
I just wanted to caution the council because, you know, when we established the new rates, we hired a consultant, and they basically then do a projection on human behavior that if you do these things to the rates, this is how much people will conserve, and then based on that, this is how much money you'll generate. And it's a rate model, and it's based upon somebody's belief of what humans will do when the rates go up, and also with projections. And I think, we use a professional, we did our best guess, but we're going to have to monitor these very carefully because the goal is to create a rate structure that encourages people to conserve, but also generates enough money to keep the utility financially solvent. But let's say, for example, that people conserve a lot more. Then that may mean that our revenues go down, and then we have to say, oh, what do? We may have to adjust the rates. Let's say people don't conserve as much. Then we may need to come back, and we may need to adjust the rates more. So this is a budget where we're going to have to be flexible and nimble, as we see things happen. The other thing that will happen is, let's say that it rains next year. And then people will say, okay, the drought's over. We need to go back to the old rates. The problem will be there will be a hangover, from the rates. People will continue to conserve, and so we probably won't be able to go straight back to the old rates. We're going to have to then monitor and see what the revenue is again. And so it's important for everybody to realize that we did the best we could, but we're going to have to watch it this year. And if people behave the way our rate expert said, we'll be fine. If they don't, we may need to adjust the rates mid-year. And then once if it rains next year, we'll have to evaluate that. And then the flip is if we have to go and actually construct the desalinization plant, then we'll clearly have to adjust rates upward next year in order to accommodate that.
Well, that'll be one hangover I'll be looking forward to having. So, Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, another piece of the hangover is that there are a lot of fixed costs being spent now for the drought that are they're going out the door. And they're just going to be part of our rate structure going forward. And two questions that I have about water, about the wells, is number one, I know that we've had this conversation. I've never actually, I think, asked you this specific number. The high school well has not been hooked up to the treatment plant because would be expensive to do so. Do we know what that number is? It's the high school well. It's like 4 blocks of piping would have to be put in to hook them up.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, Councilmember White, we're estimating at this point it's about $750,000 to run the necessary piping. We're looking at ways to kind of reduce that by, there's some of those pipes that we abandoned, and maybe we can slip line something through there or pipe burst to try and cut down on the costs. But currently it's looking like about $750,000. So that was a big deterrent last time when we looked at it, because that well produces about 250 GPM. While it's something, it's not
What is that in acre feet per year? Can't do that one. Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. But anyway, that's one of those things where we've got to. If we did that, then it would be a long-term asset rather than doing the quick fix of hooking it into the reclaim system, which is much less expensive and something could happen fairly quickly. That would obviously just be for irrigation. The other way would be a long-term benefit, which I guess we'll be looking at the USGS report, and that might help us to strategize on that as well. And then secondly, what is the timing of re-drilling the Alameda well?
Excellent question, and we are planning to come to council on the May 13th, I believe, with that contract. Our consultant, because the industry is so busy, is thinking it's going to be about 18 months before we're up and running with that facility, but we're trying to expedite things as much as we can. But we understand that there's a lot of drillers coming in from out of state now because there's so much work demand. So we're hoping that demand can be, kind of balances out at some point, because we're obviously going to need the services as well.
Okay, so 18 months is the guesstimate at this point.
That's the guesstimate at this point to be in operation.
Thank you.
Mr. Hart?
Well, I think in following up on Mr. Armstrong's comments about rates, the good news was the slide that showed where we are in relation to our neighboring jurisdictions, already below them with our new rates included. And so everybody's in the same boat. It rains, it helps everybody. If it doesn't, it hurts everybody. And we've got a great, efficient system in place that's really cost effective. So I think that's a great starting place to be from, even with these extraordinary expenses looking ahead. We'll end up, I could see we could end up ahead of Carpinteria with the highest agency, even with those additional costs. I think, in terms of when you sort of look at the numbers of orders, I'm just doing off the top of my head. I should stop. Okay.
Any other questions on the Public Works budget? Thank you very much. It's a lot of stuff that goes on every year, so I appreciate the whole team working on this. And we are adjourned.
I'd love to come home.